Yep, that's right, guys and gals. We're at the point of the show where things get very, very interesting. Not only has Ahsoka thankfully been written out of the show for the longest time, but on the unfortunate side, the marketing had a certain someone hyped up. When Dave Filoni announced that the iconic Grand Admiral Thrawn would be joining the cast of Star Wars Rebels, the fanbase went ballistic. Lore channels were posting videos to catch people up to speed on who Grand Admiral Thrawn is, or rather, who he was. And the filthy casuals and normies, well, they screamed out to the stars that one of the only good things from the expanded universe was being brought back, and that Filoni was a clever writer for that case of cherry-picking. Previously, I guarantee they had no idea who Thrawn was, and if anything, passed off his trilogy as overrated garbage by the book nerds, and irrelevant once The Force Awakens came out. Because that was the real sequel trilogy now. I mean, a lot of them were incredibly quiet when Rise of Skywalker plagiarized Dark Empire, aka one of the easiest scapegoats for why the expanded universe sucked and was never canon. Because look here, George Lucas was dumb enough to allow some talentless cows to resurrect Palpatine. Then J.J. Abrams did that when he ran out of ideas. Because plagiarism is sort of his thing. That's what the username of my channel mocks him for. So yeah, Thrawn was back after Filoni skimmed through the source material at best. And the Disney fanboys were jumping up and down despite having never read the Thrawn trilogy, instead hearing who he is through a lore video, or word of mouth. While the description of high-ranking commander with a calm demeanor and tactical efficiency is an accurate description of his character in the source material, there's a difference between hearing about greatness and actually reading it. Filoni I would sort into the former category. We all know that he very loosely knows about the expanded universe and the stuff in it. I mean, he was the guy who looked at Wolf Yularen in A New Hope, looked at the white uniform, and assumed he was a Grand Admiral because he was wearing a white uniform. Never bothered to look at the plaque on the uniform and cross-check it with Thrawn. That's why Yularen was in the Clone Wars as an Admiral, because Filoni wanted to show his progression to his eventual non-existent rank. I can say firsthand that watching Rebels Season 3, that Filoni's depiction feels like someone described to him who Thrawn was, rather than actually reading the books himself. I guess Filoni figured that he couldn't waste hours of his life reading the Thrawn trilogy, so he made a shortcut when reintroducing Thrawn. Although something I want to emphasize is that Disney Thrawn is not the same character as OG Thrawn. As per the continuity reboot, parallel characters were already a different person for a simple reason. The experiences make the character. One difference completely alters a variant as someone else. How to describe this in an understandable way is looking at Marvel, for example. Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is not the same Spider-Man created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. This Spider-Man was instead created by Sam Raimi and David Cope. The Spider-Man film series was a separate universe from the original character, based on the source material of the OG character, and probably a bunch of other comics until 2002. Marvel itself also enforces this, as the original Spider-Man is of Earth 616, while Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is of Earth 96283. This was a simple fact even before Spider-Man No Way Home came out. They were different characters by default, which were retroactively brought into the same multiverse and reality. Some people like to think of Spider-Man as one character, but in this case, they're thinking of a base template held by many different characters with the same name, powers, parallel origin story, etc. Thrawn in this case is no different. Original and Disney canon are two separate universes. I don't know if Disney will be dumb enough to attempt a multiverse story, but the point is, these two Thrawns are parallel but different versions of each other. This is by default of the fact that they live in separate universes. So technically, Dave Filoni created Disney Thrawn, while Timothy Zahn created the original Thrawn. But to make things convoluted, Timothy Zahn ended up returning to Star Wars to write novels for Filoni's Thrawn. Yeah, what a paradox. Although Timothy Zahn, as I hear, is a complete sellout nowadays. The other expanded universe writers jumped ship, but Zahn? Nah. He'd rather support Disney Star Wars. Why he does so, despite being someone who should absolutely know better, is anyone's guess. I like to think when Filoni decided to bring Thrawn back, either he or the Lucasfilm story team or whoever contacted Zahn, and he was just so darn happy that his character was being considered for recanonization. He has publicly stated that Filoni's depictions are accurate and very close to how he wrote them, and all that crap. But do I believe him? Not really. But the thing is, when it comes to Disney Star Wars, you only know if someone's telling the truth if they're negative. When Mark Hamill was warning us about The Last Jedi, you can tell he was contractually obligated to shut the hell up despite that. So these days, you only know someone's opinion is genuine if it's a negative one. If they claim that The Last Jedi is their favorite Star Wars movie, always take it with a grain of salt. Always. So point is, Timothy Zahn wrote a novel for Disney canon to propel Star Wars Rebels Season 3. Thrawn, published in 2017, is basically the introduction of Thrawn into Star Wars Rebels, serving as a prelude to him entering the show. As always, I listened to the audiobook which felt longer than I'd like, and is essentially Thrawn's revamped origin story. I may not have read Outbound Flight yet, but I'll assess the book based on what I have read, that being the Thrawn trilogy. Keep in mind that Timothy Zahn was essentially writing a story based on someone else's imitation of Thrawn, a character he originally created. So any changes Filoni made by default, he had to adapt to. One of the strangest changes to start off with is giving Thrawn pupils. The Chiss in the expanded universe had no pupils, just blank red eyes, and if Filoni had read the source material, he'd know that this gave Thrawn the ability to stare into people's souls, but his decision to give him pupils completely negated this, and so we never get a moment of Thrawn staring into people with his blank red eyes. I don't recall a moment in either Star Wars Rebels or the Thrawn novel where Thrawn gets that trademark ability. It may seem minor, but it did really make Thrawn more scary, where you couldn't tell the expression in his eyes. People felt uncomfortable about him because of this, on top of his general demeanor. As far as I've seen, giving Thrawn pupils was not only a stupid change, but a counterproductive one, because it seems Filoni really missed the trick here. So I'd like to talk about Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novel before we get into the show. Yes, I know it may seem like padding, since I have an urge to make scripts longer than the last, but I think it's kind of justified given the Thrawn novel is direct tie-in material to Season 3 of Rebels. Besides, when has Disney ever expected you to not do your homework to understand their shitty stories? Thankfully, Marvel Comics published 6 issues that visually adapt the novel itself, so thankfully, I don't have to play a video game while I describe this novel. If I did have to, I'd probably play Empire at War or something, with the expansion that has Thrawn in it. Anyways, let's get into the novel. So to be honest actually, the novel actually started off pretty strong, and it felt like this novel would perhaps live up to the hype that so many Disney shills touted it up to be. I remember there was this one guy who said he didn't like reading, and he was, quote, glued to this book. And you know, at first, that was my early impression. The book starts with the Imperial discovery of Thrawn. Right off the bat, the basic approach of having the story be reactive around Thrawn was a good idea. For a lot of the book, the novel actually follows the perspective of one Eli Vanto, who, to summarize who he is, he's basically a rookie from a backwater planet when the novel starts. Basically what happens is that the scouting party he's a part of, led by Colonel Barris and Captain Park, go to some uncharted planet and then discover a hut, indicating that there's probably someone who lives here. But finding said resident is a challenge, as it's shown that whoever lives here is incredibly clever, and he outwits the Imperials. It goes so far that he's able to disguise himself as a stormtrooper, although eventually he's caught. Although it's indicated that he intended to give himself up in that moment. Right off the bat, they introduced the Blue Man as almost a one-man army, as he fooled everyone. So when he's brought back to the captain, Park mistakes him for Elon Musk and asks him why he had to ruin Twitter. Nah, I'm just kidding, but I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. He does really look like Elon Musk in the Ahsoka series, and given how widespread the Elon Musk hate is after he took over Twitter, people just made the connection. Eli, due to his background and understanding the language of Psi-Bisti, translates for Thrawn to Park. Thrawn knows enough Galactic Basic, but he prefers to speak Psi-Bisti. Just like in the expanded universe, his original name is this unintelligible shit, but he basically gives himself the nickname Thrawn, just so everyone can have an easier time. Vanto, due to his unique skill of knowing Psi-Bisti, is basically assigned as Thrawn's translator. We learn in this opening scene that Thrawn is of the Chiss species, like in the expanded universe, and that he was exiled from the Chiss ascendancy because he had a different philosophy from his peers. They didn't believe in preemptive strikes, and Thrawn disobeyed his superiors and was exiled. Due to Thrawn's tactical skills, even as a one-man party, and also the fact that his species are very cornered off, and Vanto only knows the Chiss due to stories and whatnot, Park decides to bring him to Coruscant, in which they'll all see the Emperor himself. We get some additional characterization of Thrawn during the trip there, in a conversation between Vanto and Thrawn. Thrawn has this approach of learning only what he deems directly relevant, not asking questions about Coruscant, the Emperor, or even the Galactic Empire. Throughout the book, we also see that Thrawn is easily able to read someone like a book. He can pick up on body language like a natural. He pays extra attention to what people say and how they say it. And it's clear Thrawn is someone you should approach carefully, because whether you believe you will or not, Thrawn can potentially figure out your entire life story if you're not careful. They bring Thrawn all the way to Coruscant, and it's here where Vanto stresses out. He didn't realize they were actually going to go anywhere near the Emperor's palace. The tension about meeting the Emperor rises as he even sees a royal guard check them all, and upon seeing the Emperor, he almost pisses himself. The Emperor looks nothing like what Imperial propaganda showed. He has this dark aura about him, and he's fucking deformed and hideous. Thrawn, however, speaks to the Emperor head on. He talks boldly, albeit respectfully, to the Emperor. He speaks to the Emperor about a great threat in the unknown regions, which isn't the Yuuzhan Vong, and offers his service to the Emperor, stating that the Galactic Empire could greatly assist the Chiss ascendancy. The way Thrawn talks too is very close to how he did in the book trilogy that introduced him. He offers his word that he will serve the Emperor and the Empire faithfully, and even when the Emperor tries to throw him in for a loop, asking the hypothetical of what he will do if the Chiss directly fuck with the Empire, who his allegiance will be to then. And Thrawn simply responds that it will be the Empire. So with that, Thrawn is inducted into the Imperial Academy as a key exception to the no aliens rule the Empire commonly has. In both the expanded universe and Disney canon, Thrawn is pretty much an exception. Now, a key criticism that applies to Disney's Galactic Empire is that it's way too diverse. Having a significant amount of women and people of color and different ethnicities, even if they are humans, makes the Empire look way more tolerant subconsciously. You look at the original trilogy, and they're all white men with British accents, because British people are always the bad guys in American films, if they aren't Germans or Russians. That's just how it goes. Jokes aside, you get the idea. When you factor in the Inquisitors too, you make the Empire look like pronoun central, detracting from what the Empire is meant to represent: exclusivity and oppression. Now look, you can have some black or maybe Asian dudes in the Empire sometimes, but you shouldn't go overload on it. Use them sparingly, because remember what the Empire is meant to represent. This is a key problem with the wokeness, that they can't even figure out who to give representation to or not. Like, for God's sake, make the gay or trans people on the rebel side or something. Now back to Thrawn. Due to the Disney Galactic Empire's poor writing, they don't exactly emphasize Thrawn's rise through the ranks as effectively as they should be. Reading the book, I never got the vibe that Thrawn's classmates or peers in the Imperial Navy hated him that much. Oh, sure, they might make some disrespectful remarks, mistaking him for a Pantoran, or this one scene where some guy tells Eli Vanto that Thrawn's rise through the ranks is gonna hold eventually, and Vanto as Thrawn's aide will be stuck with some dead-end role when that happens. This isn't exactly a problem I fault Timothy Zahn for, it's just how the Disney Galactic Empire operates. The fact that they appear more inclusive than the Empire George Lucas created. Like in the Thrawn trilogy, you can tell Thrawn is a super special exception. People are looking to him out of desperation 5 years after Endor because the Empire needs support more than ever, and people are happy to serve the Grand Admiral, even if he's an alien. I also pretty much inferred that since Thrawn is what we would call a near-human, that's what gave him the slight narrow precedent to become an exception to the Empire's strict anti-alien policies. Like when Leia was talking about how bigoted the Emperor's stance towards aliens were, it was emphasized quite well. No one in the New Republic seemed to have heard of Thrawn, and that heavily implies that Thrawn's achievements were brushed under the rug, despite his rank. Like at the end of the day, Palpatine intended to strip aliens of their rights and build a human-centric empire, because he thought it would be easy to use aliens as scapegoats and whatnot. I didn't get that impression reading this novel, or watching Star Wars Rebels Season 3 or 4. And that's where I wanted to talk about this novel's decrease in quality gradually. After that brilliant start, introducing Thrawn and Eli Vanto, the two most important characters in this story, I slowly lost interest in the story. By the end, I'd say that it turned into a 7 out of 10. Closely touching the line between 6 and 7. And that's probably because the story seemed to get sidetracked a lot. We do see Thrawn at the Imperial Academy being bullied by his classmates, one of them calling him an alien freak, and I kinda wish there was a more satisfying sense of karma or something at the end, when Thrawn gets his Grand Admiral rank and plaque, with Thrawn basically being like,
"Who's laughing now?"
I don't know. I thought there was a payoff missing or something. Not to mention that the story splits in two when they introduce Orinda Pryce, who of course will be in Star Wars Rebels Season 3. The problem is that her story doesn't correlate much with Thrawn. Sure, the pair of them meet like maybe 2 or 3 times based on memory, but their stories don't seem to connect with each other that well. I noted how in the Darth Bane trilogy, other central characters might not meet Darth Bane at all until a certain point. For example, Johan Othone didn't meet Darth Bane until the end when they fought and he died, but his story still played an important part in his correlation to Bane's. Given Johan always suspected the possibility of a Sith surviving the Battle of Ruusan, and he was always reluctant to let that possibility go, despite his best efforts to forget about it. Then when the day comes when he learns that a Sith did indeed survive through the character Daravit, who informs him that his cousin Xana joined Bane as his apprentice, Johan gets all the confirmation he needs, and so on and so forth. It's also worth noting that Johan's story isn't just to solely benefit Bane's story. He gets his own personal moments, such as the triumph of making it to the rank of Jedi Knight shortly after the Battle of Ruusan. Orinda Pryce, though? Not so much. She's introduced in what seems like an incredibly random and out-of-place moment. And when I was listening to the audiobook, I was thinking about how much I was being taken out of the investment concerning Thrawn and Vanto. Like, the chemistry I was experiencing between Thrawn and Vanto was superb, and then the story just cuts to Orinda Pryce? What the hell? And keep in mind, her story takes up a lot of the book. I think it would have been a better idea to just focus on Thrawn and surrounding characters. But when they throw Pryce randomly into the mix, I was just startled. Basically, parallel to Thrawn's rise, Pryce basically works her way up to becoming governor of Lothal, her homeworld. Eventually though, I kinda just started to lose interest with Thrawn's story. It felt like they were having Thrawn do different shit, and after every promotion, I was not exactly anticipating his eventual rise to Grand Admiral. It also didn't feel like Thrawn faced any disadvantages when he kept on getting higher and higher in the Imperial Navy. It felt like there was just some insignificant scuffle when he started off, but by the time he's a standard admiral, he and Vanto are completely fine. Like, even if Thrawn never became a Grand Admiral, he was perfectly well off in his admiral position, also commanding the Chimera, which we all know is his flagship. Vanto too stops stressing about his prospect with becoming Thrawn's aide, as he's always promoted up with Thrawn, maybe a rank or 2 below, so he's well off as well. Basically, think of it like the movie Scarface. Imagine that Tony's rise to the top goes with no problems, and then when he's eventually at the top, things don't backfire on him at all. He just keeps everything he has, and then some. That would have made the film pretty boring, right? Well, yeah. Thrawn seemed to be dispatched to random missions I couldn't give two shits about, and it's his actions that get him a promotion. I don't really find myself caring after a certain bit. Everything's hunky-dory by the end. I mean, when Thrawn does get his plaque, he directly asks Palpatine about the Death Star, which was a closely guarded secret. Thrawn advises him not to waste so much money and resources on a project like the Death Star, and the investment would be better spent on something else. Palps, of course, doesn't listen to him. Honestly, speaking up about the Death Star was actually kind of a nice way to end the book, but there was just a lot of crap that I didn't care about. Still though, it's not terribly written, and I do at least somewhat remember what the rest of the book was like. But given the decrease in quality afterwards, I give it that static 7 out of 10. Decent, but highly overrated. I certainly didn't find myself dying to read Thrawn Alliances after that. I'm pretty much done with the Disney Thrawn book series, because it just isn't that interesting. It's competently written, but the problem is, I guess, is that it's packed in a universe full of shitty stories. I imagine a key reason why Fallen Order and Survivor might have actually worked is because of its standalone nature, which gave it a chance to be competent. It's not without its references, but still, it's got solid writing, which is a rarity these days. Alright. So the novel pretty much set the stage for Thrawn in Disney canon. Timothy Zahn would go on to write sequels and prequels, and to be honest, I don't understand why they would need that many novels for Thrawn in the context of Disney canon. But I guess it's just the act of pumping shit out on an industrial level. Quantity over quality, in other words. It doesn't matter if the canon is 90% garbage, just make sure that there's at least 10% good stuff. Ugh. That's why we can't get anything nice, because they constantly fill Disney canon with rubbish and it's polluted with shit that nobody cares about. I feel I may have greatly summarized the Thrawn novel, but I quickly realized I didn't feel like talking about it that much. I've done my review. Now it's time to get into Rebels Season 3. So past the halfway point of the show, they changed things up visually. You'll notice that Ezra and Sabine in particular have new haircuts, because it's part of that illusion that the characters have grown. Filoni did this exactly for the Clone Wars. Just change Ahsoka's appearance up a little bit instead of doing the hard work of writing the character's development in play. The hard stuff is what you should skip as a writer, or at least that's what Filoni believes. Anyways, as I said, they introduced Thrawn, and as I also said, they hyped the shit out of this character. He was all over the marketing, propping up this old expanded universe legacy character, when really only those who have read the books actually have a clue about who he is. We all know that Filoni's tactic was to artificially increase interest for Star Wars Rebels, so what better way than to spoon-feed a legacy character? Here's the thing though, you better be ready to bring your A game in writing, because Thrawn isn't someone you can afford to write poorly. You better bring it 110%, or drop your pencil and see yourself out by the door, and knowing the standard of writing so far, I doubt Thrawn can save the show. But with that being said, let's get into Star Wars Rebels Season 3. The first episode is the first of 2 parts, and believe me when I say that they absolutely waste the first part. You think they'd be hot off the Season 2 finale where they went to Malachor and Ahsoka presumably died, but instead, we're met with something incredibly underwhelming and lame. We start at this random prison complex in which Ezra and friends, minus Kanan, are on a mission to free Hondo Anaka from prison. Again, does it feel like we just skipped 10 to 20 minutes of a story, and it ties into my point about how they just throw us into something without a cause and effect? This time skip just annoys me, but you already saw me criticize this in the last video, so let's just move on. The whole entrance to the prison is structured like a stealth action video game. We've got that detection light, for example. On top of that, we've also got some more incompetent stormtroopers. Ezra is able to punch one of them and then throw them off. It's elaborated through dialogue that Ezra is in charge of this mission, and that Hondo has vital intel that will be useful for the rebellion. As always, there's no tension, because they're easily able to break in. This seems like a pretty lax security prison if we're being honest. We also see that if anything, Ezra's just getting more and more powerful. He's able to safely force grip Chopper and lower him down, and they break into the prison, reach Hondo's cell, in which we see Hondo and his Ugnut buddy Turbo. We see by this point that Ezra considers Hondo his friend and vice versa. They stick around to talk a bit, and this waste of time results in stormtroopers walking near them. And when Ezra blasts them, they alert the whole base. But let's be real, it's not like this increase in security means anything. They easily run away from stormtroopers, and Hondo's even able to argue with Turbo, who makes the lethal mistake of running ahead of the whole group and gets blasted by a walker.
And it's gone.
And then Ezra, no joke, dominates the mind of the walker's pilot, in which he basically makes him destroy all the stormtroopers in their path. And since they called Heir in, they jump off the bridge onto the Ghost and get away. So yeah, this whole prison break sequence was lame. The only saving grace was Hondo, ironically. His remarks are pretty nice, such as when Sabine gives him a weapon, and he talks about how this weapon's worth a lot on the black market, and how he wants to keep it. It's the way he says it too. As always, the stormtroopers are just crappy video game enemies. So yeah, once they're safe on the Ghost, everyone except Hondo criticizes Ezra for how he conducted the mission that he himself proposed. Ezra starts to get really pissy, and that results in him storming out. And we see why Ezra's change of persona is a thing. He walks into his room, ranting his ass off about how ungrateful they are, and we see that he's commonly using that Sith holocron retrieved at Malachor. Yeah, he's been using it for an unspecified amount of time, and it's clouded his judgment. Okay, I really hate this. Does Filoni or any of the writers see how dangerous the dark side is? It should be emphasized that the dark side is like an incredibly addictive narcotic that darksiders try their hardest to overdose on. Even the smallest taste of the dark side will make the user want to come back for more. As such, Ezra using the Sith holocron is silly and reckless. I have to wonder why they haven't destroyed it by now. Also, I have to wonder where Darth Vader is. In case you don't know, he just drops out of the show post-Malachor and he doesn't show up again. Ever. You'd think it'd be a super important mission of his to retrieve the holocron, but again, he just drops out of the show and we never see him again. Nor do we see any more Inquisitors. I mean, thank God we're not seeing any more Inquisitors, given the last 3 the show threw at us, but it's not quite explained why a character like Vader is at a seeming absence. My only guess is that they couldn't afford to continue paying James Earl Jones to be in a TV show or something. But the thing is, if you couldn't afford him anymore, why couldn't you get someone else? Like, is the guy who voiced him in The Force Unleashed still around? Since this show just drops villains in and out whenever they feel like, the threat level is always inconsistent. Like in the Clone Wars at least, the main overarching threat was clear. Palps and Dooku were like the top 2 bad guys, and then topple that up with secondary antagonists like Grievous and Ventress, and that's a consistent threat level. But in Rebels, we start off with Kallus and the Grand Inquisitor. Tarkin's in it for a little bit, but he's quickly dropped out. And as well as that, come the next season they jump the shark and write in Darth Vader, but we also get 2 useless antagonists. I guess Kallus is still around, but they ruin that by trying to give him a shitty redemption arc. Then comes season 3, well, we'll get to that. Point is that there doesn't seem to be a major villain. They barely reference the Emperor at that, so that's a problem. Again, it's like this show has a villain of the week formula. But back to the show, Ezra's got that darn holocron, and he's been using it unsupervised. He should be doomed when he's using something as dangerous as that, but whatever. They also don't show Ezra's struggle and anger as intensely as they could have. We cut to the Imperials, in which we see Grand Moff Tarkin, who's been written back into the show again after the voice actor's holiday, in which we get a main antagonist for the rest of the show. Governor Price. The same Price from the Thrawn novel, and the same bitch who was also occasionally referenced in season 1, I believe, makes her debut here. And her introduction is little more than her strolling into Tarkin's office and requesting the quote-unquote 7th Fleet to deal with the increasing rebel threat. She explains that Admiral Constantine has been mostly useless, and the Grand Moff grants her the fleet, which I presume has a certain someone in it. I recall in the Thrawn novel, towards the end, they were setting up Thrawn to get involved with thwarting the rebel threat. Anyways, cut to a rebel meeting. Hondo requests a decent ship in return for the intel, and when Commander Sato tells him that he needs to prove that his intel is worth a shit, he presents the planet Yama, home to Reclam Station, a secret Imperial salvage yard, explaining that the late Turbo was working there, presumably as a slave. You know, now that it occurred to me, why in the hell was the unpredictable Hondo allowed to know where the rebel base was? That's kinda stupid. Like, I'm sure that Ezra would be naive enough to trust him, but everyone else? Nada. But ignoring that, Hondo specifically points out Y-Wings that the Alliance could steal. Despite the age of the Y-Wings, Captain Rex vouches for them, saying that they could be very effective, and Commander Sato discusses how their ultimate goal is to destroy the factory on Lothal. So yeah, Ezra is given command over the mission, as well as a promotion to Lieutenant Commander. Yeah, Ezra's still not of age yet, and he's getting a promotion despite clearly not being old enough? Well, I guess that's the classic Filoni mentality of thinking it's a-okay to let kids participate in war. I remember when I first watched this episode, this was maybe the most memorable thing about it. Yeah, that's right. Ezra getting a promotion was the most memorable thing. Let me remind you that Rebels is pretty forgettable. Hera remarks to Ezra how Kanan will be proud of him, and Ezra responds that he's barely around nowadays. And we cut to Kanan in the middle of meditation. Since he's now blind, he isn't as active as he once was. Well, at least they're showing that his newfound disability has affected him a lot. I can imagine becoming blind would be a huge bummer for anyone. They also show that via the time jump, Kanan is somewhat used to being blind, but still hasn't fully adapted to his new lifestyle. This is pretty much the only believable time jump switch up, honestly. Watching the episode, I actually saw myself feeling bad for Kanan. It's one of the few things they did well. This one scene tells us so much. Kanan starts to hear the voice of an entity further away, but is interrupted by Hera, who informs him about Ezra's promotion, and basically hints that he should talk with them since he blames himself for what happened to him and Ahsoka. Kanan agrees and he walks into Ezra's room, and Ezra, who has the holocron on the side, panics, as he knows that Kanan will be upset that he used the holocron. Kanan accidentally touches it, and at least he ain't upset. Nah, he's fucking livid at Ezra. Ezra tries to dismiss the consequences of using the holocron, as Kanan points out that only someone who uses the dark side can gain access to it. Still, the most the holocron is doing is making Ezra argumentative and aggressive. Really doesn't sell the danger of the holocron. So what does Kanan do? He merely confiscates the damn thing. He doesn't destroy it so Ezra can't use it anymore. The thing is, why wasn't it destroyed earlier? If someone like Vader or Maul got access to it, they would be royally screwed. So keeping the holocron intact is really a big mistake. Point is, Kanan returns to his meditation spot and he approaches the sound of the voice, bringing a spider deterrent pole with him, and goes for his hike. Meanwhile, we see Ezra and friends get ambushed by the mining guild, and so they try to evade them. It's a pretty meaningless scene in the grand scheme of things. So I'll spare you the trouble and get to the two later scenes you want me to talk about. The first is Kanan walking into the domain of some giant named Bendu. What the hell were the writers smoking when they came up with that?
You wanna buy some death sticks?
He's voiced by Tom Baker, who you may or may not recognize as one of the many Doctor Who's.
Who?
Oh, you knew I was gonna make that joke, but point is, Bendu is this massive dude, who looks like he belongs in something like Lord of the Rings more than Star Wars. First problem with this character, he propagates the equal light, equal dark side myth that is the bane of anyone who properly understands the Force. Bendu talks about the Jedi and the Sith and how he belongs to neither the light or dark. Rather, he exists in the middle. That's not how the Force works. Alright, I'm getting damn sick of this grey Jedi misconception, because I have to set the record straight. There is only the light side and the dark side, nothing in between. You can either obey the will of the Force or disobey it and impose your own will on the Force. That's the only two ways you're going to use the Force. If you legitimately try to use both in equal measure, then that's just stupid. The reason is that you might as well be using the dark side only. You're practically obeying the will of the Force half the time, but then ruining it by tapping into the dark side. It's also worth noting that Force users who have a crisis like this tend to become weaker. In the Darth Plagueis novel, the titular character mentioned a Sith Lord named Darth Gravid to Palpatine. He explains that Gravid was a Dark Lord earlier in the lineage of the Banite Sith, who started to be drawn to Jedi teachings like compassion and whatnot. This ultimately weakened his connection to the Force, because since he was a Darksider, using the light side to an extent weakened his ability to bask in the dark side and use powerful dark side abilities. If you're not fully tapped into one side, you won't be as effective as you could be. That's why when Gravid was drawn to Jedi teachings, he drove himself mad, intending to destroy all the Sith lore in order to reform the Order, and he was only stopped by his young apprentice, who narrowly managed to kill him and take the mantle of Dark Lord of the Sith early, before she had even reached maximum power. However, Darth Gravid had already destroyed a lot of the Sith lore, the most significant of which being Transfer Essence, the ability to transfer one's consciousness to another body. So yeah, that's what trying to balance the light with the dark does to someone. There is no grey side of the Force. In something like Knights of the Old Republic, the grey morality scale is just a game mechanic. It's not a part of the lore. As a role-playing game, players are obviously going to be neutral when they start the game as a blank slate. Like any choice-making game that involves a morality scale, that's just how it goes. So Bendu claiming to be, quote, in the middle is so stupid, and Kanan should be pointing out how impossible that is. But he doesn't. His dialogue also reinforces this misconception. He observes the Sith holocron that Kanan has with them, and spouts some philosophical nonsense about whatever. Based on what he says, I presume he's talking about how one becomes evil, yada yada, and then Bendu, because it turns out he's a total dick, grabs Kanan's spider repellent pole and destroys it, attracting the spiders.
Wow, what an asshole.
What an abrupt way to get someone to learn a lesson about seeing through the Force. Bendu tries to spin this as helping Kanan, and it cuts away before we get anything significant. So since we're cutting away, we get to the next significant thing to talk about. Admiral Constantine talks about how he doesn't value the rebels that much as a threat, and a voice cuts in, stating that he wishes to keep it that way. And yeah, this is Grand Admiral Thrawn's debut in the show, and by God, I am seriously underwhelmed. I recall how they introduced Thrawn in, well, the Thrawn trilogy, as he's introduced in the very first chapter from the perspective of his protege Gilad Pellaeon. In the first chapter alone, we see a lot of assets and gimmicks that Thrawn has. For example, his bodyguard Rook, which I'm just sweating a black hole for when we get to Season 4 of Rebels, and we see a lot of Thrawn's personality in the opening chapter, as well as in his appreciation for art, because as he says, it's a good way to learn a lot about your enemy. I'm paraphrasing, but you get the point. It was a superb way of introducing the big bad, but here, it's so damn lame. Unless you were following the marketing, Thrawn just comes out of nowhere. And I can imagine some of the core demographic watching this show looks at this blue-skinned dude with red eyes and asks,
Who the heck are you?
I can also tell you without prior knowledge, the show doesn't exactly prop Thrawn up like he's hot shit. He just randomly enters the show with next to no setup. This reminds me of how The Rise of Skywalker was marketed. If you went into the movie knowing nothing about it, other than it was a new Star Wars movie, you'd be incredibly confused at the dead speak Palps' back part, because there was zero build-up. And you might realize after the fact that you were supposed to watch the trailers and shit to be hyped for the return of Palpatine, which was incredibly lazy, I might add. They're basically doing the same thing, dropping him into the show and expecting to know who he is. Tarkin passively calls him by his name and rank, and Constantine is shocked that he's a Grand Admiral. And Thrawn responds that he was promoted after an event we never get to see, unless you read the Thrawn novel. Not a criticism here, just something they decided not to show us. They heavily indicate that a lot of innocent people died, but the price was worth it because there's no longer rebels in that sector. I presume they're bringing on a Grand Admiral because they value the rebels that much. In the Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn was on the losing side by that point, and was still able to do an incredible job turning the war around in the Empire's favor before he made the mistake, or rather, the oversight of not considering his bodyguard Rook as a factor. If you've read the trilogy, or watch my video about the 3 books, you know what I'm talking about. Point is, the Empire is at its peak here, not facing the disadvantages it did 5 years after Endor. So this is another problem. The writers better step up their A game with how they write Thrawn. Because if Thrawn is going after the rebels directly, you can't afford him to present him as a total joke in the slightest, or give him the smallest of failures, unless it's something like his oversight with Rook that cost him his life. In the Thrawn trilogy, he was described as someone who has no weaknesses. He adapts quickly to whatever is thrown at him, and masters the art of war. Now, Thrawn is an incredibly outside-the-box thinker, and can observe a lot more about a situation than the average person can. The first thing that Thrawn figures out with the breakout of Hondo Anaka is that his cellmate was a laborer at Yama, and basically he concludes that the rebels have also attacked the mining guild nearby, and figured out that the rebels will likely be planning to attack Yama.
That's it?
That's it?
We've been working on that whole day!
Yeah, that's all they talk about. This shit that Thrawn described is not rocket science. I'm pretty sure any decent tactician who looks into the following information could figure out that the rebels probably intended to attack Yama. I mean, I imagine prior to the episode's start, the Empire integrated both Hondo and Turba. This is so goddamn lame. They try to present Thrawn as an outside-the-box thinker for something that wouldn't be hard to figure out for any competent tactician. Did they really need to drag Thrawn into this? Because this seems like absolute overkill. But then again, Thrawn figured out something very basic. They could have made it 10 times better by having Thrawn come up with a follow-up strategy or something for the defense of Yama Station or whatever. So far, I'm underwhelmed at what Thrawn's so-called brilliance is. Anyways, we cut to Ezra learning through a scan that they're quickly destroying the Y-Wing fighters. So Ezra ignores the recon part of the mission and orders everyone to go in now, because he reasons that he needs at least some of the Y-Wing fighters intact, and there isn't enough time to do a recon. And that's the episode. And that brings me to another problem. The pacing is awful. The episode is basically just nothing but setup for the next episode. And not a lot happens in the present episode. You think there'd be a lot more stuff happening after Malachor. But this is perhaps one of the most uneventful, major episodes of Star Wars Rebels. To be fair, this Season 3 premiere originally aired with both parts in an hour-long movie to kickstart the season. But come on, the first half could have been more eventful, right? Because as far as I can judge, the first half is not television movie worthy. Anyways, you get the point. Let's get on with the second part. So given Ezra's brash order, or maybe because Sabine wasn't looking where she was flying, they bump into a dismantler droid guarding the station. The collision with one does minimal damage, but afterwards, there's a bunch of them going after the Phantom. We see some reused assets, including that commander who I thought died in Season 2, but I guess they're just reusing models. I mean, it's lazy, but I didn't expect anything more. Instead of using the turret or something, Rex literally decides to open the door to the shuttle to try to blast the damn droid. And that only results in him nearly being flung out, if not for Zeb catching him. Good going, dude. The Phantom after this gets caught in the storm for a bit, but after that they're totally fine. They manage to attach to the station without the Imperials getting their signal again. And I kind of feel this is just a lazy way of having the advantage of stealth. Because I don't understand why their signal didn't pop back up when they exited the storm. Well, they aren't detected. They also have an easy way of shutting down the conveyor belt when they come across some of the Ognot laborers. And Hondo as translator convinces them to shut it down. These pigs are completely unsupervised, by the way. I would have expected some stormtroopers guarding them, but I guess not. The second problem they face is getting fuel for the bombers, and that's where it cuts away. I guess they do an okay job at presenting Ezra's sloppy planning, but with that being said, we cut back to Kanan, who gets a lesson in visualizing without sight. Basically, Kanan easily adapts to additional perceptions such as sound and smell to tell where the spiders are, and for some reason, despite being damn close, the spiders don't attack him. This little lesson seems a bit rushed. But I suppose a Force user could adapt to blindness easier than someone in the real world, so I'll be lenient. I have to remind myself that the Star Wars universe doesn't always apply to our own. Well, actually they do elaborate on why the spiders aren't hostile, and it's apparently because they see Kanan in anger, grief, and fear or something. The episode isn't quite clear about it, but Kanan is easily able to get some sort of sight back. However, this is where he senses Ezra and friends in danger, and so he proceeds to go help him. Bendu asks him about the holocron, and Kanan tells him to keep it, expressing no care over it anymore. Alright, you're just going to give a holocron to a giant you just met? We cut back to Ezra and friends conveniently fueling up the Y-Wing bombers. The Imperials finally find out that the rebels are still alive due to one last dismantler droid spotting them. So wait, did you guys not have additional security cameras aside from those dismantler droids? The Imperials proceed to lock down the conveyor belt, and so the team split up, as Ezra plans to barge into the command center and reverse the override. It's here where Heir contacts Ezra and figures out that his recon mission turned into a recovery mission, and Commander Sato is going to get the rebel fleet to arrive at the station. Ezra basically goes on a rampage killing stormtroopers and comes into the command center, and oh, this is the same guy from Rebels Season 2. It's just that he was demoted to commander afterwards. They also kill any tension or momentum, with Ezra mocking him after the dude vents that he's the reason he was demoted in the first place. Also, small galaxy I must say. Ezra decides to cut power to the entire station, despite the commander's protests, and well, everyone opts to escape, with Ezra saying that he'll get on the Phantom. Hondo also decides to opt out early, making the excuse that he needed to get out of there, and wishes Ezra goodbye. Anyways, everything goes to shit with the Y-Wing bombers having no hyperdrive, as that was removed by the Empire, as an Imperial Star Destroyer shows up. Also, Ezra doesn't get to the Phantom in time, and it slips from the station and plummets down the gas giant.
And it's gone.
Well, at least I can say this time, they're not making things too easy for the good guys. That was a major complaint that I had previously. Oh wait, the Rebel fleet shows up immediately after, and the Y-Wing bombers are easily able to dock on the carrier the Rebels captured. When the Empire contact the Grand Admiral, Thrawn tells them to let the Rebels off because, quote, he has a larger objective in mind. What that is, we'll have to wait until the next episode or later. Point is, the Rebels are easily able to get away, with the Ghost picking up Ezra. When everyone gets back, Ezra is pretty much demoted.
And it's gone.
And is chastised for his poor planning and leadership skills, but then again, you promoted a kid to Lieutenant Commander. What did you guys expect? Heir also mentions that the Y-Wing bombers aren't even for their rebel cell. Rather, it's for General Dodonna in the larger rebellion.
What?
Wait, so there's a larger rebellion that's forming, and we're only learning about this now? This would have been nice to know earlier, guys. It's pretty lazy that we learn this in a single line of dialogue. I was taken out of the story because this was initially hard for me to swallow. Where the hell did General Dodonna's rebel cell come from? I was under the impression that this was the rebellion so far, pretty much, and that everything else was split up. I guess that's a testament to the terrible world building of the show. So they wrap up the episode with Ezra fully admitting that using the Sith holocron was a mistake, and apologizes to Kanan. Wait, so are they just resolving the conflict that easily? Ezra just fucks up and realizes the Sith holocron is bad news? They've done a poor job at selling the holocron as dangerous in the slightest. In episode 3, after this shitty two-parter, we cut straight to Ezra questioning Kanan about the holocron, as if him admitting the holocron was bad news in the last episode didn't happen. I love the classic backtracking. It makes it impossible for anything to be done. Instead of moving the story forward, you just gotta repeat the same thing over and over again. Ugh. Anyways, they come across a damaged Hammerhead ship, indicating it was attacked. When they board the ship, there's conveniently someone still alive that gasps something about someone with a red blade. Their first guess is that it's another Inquisitor, but then they're contacted by Heir, who gets pushed aside, and we see that the red blade guy is in fact Maul. Darn, I should have known. It was either him or Darth Vader, but Vader was written out of the show because the voice actor was done, so obviously not him. As soon as they reveal it's Maul, they cut to the Rebels intro, and it's the same upbeat theme that takes me out of the episode. Yeah, so Maul has the entire Ghost crew hostage, and demands both Kanan's Jedi holocron and the Sith holocron from Malachor, and if both are not handed over, the entire Ghost crew will be killed. Yeah. So Kanan realizes he needs to get it back from Bendu. Now, I don't understand why Kanan didn't just destroy the holocron, but I think that if he had, it would have done nothing but improve the storytelling. I mean, think about it. Even if Bendu refuses to hand it over for whatever reason, at least there still is a Sith holocron that can be retrieved. Even if Kanan and Ezra have to take it back by force. But if the holocron was destroyed, Kanan would realize there's no reasonable bargaining chip with Maul, and he has to figure out how to free the rest of the Ghost crew and defeat Maul. But gosh forbid we get something that shows us the writers actually tried to challenge themselves. When writers don't make things too easy for themselves, it can show that they care. It can be something as simple as John McClane without shoes. That was put in there, and it shows the writers didn't just want things to be too easy. Anyways, since the holocron is intact, Ezra and Kanan go to the Rebel base and hike out towards Bendu. Meanwhile, we see Maul as the hostage taker, demands Hera give him a tour of the ship, and then when they get to a certain room, he probes her mind and finds out where the Jedi holocron is, so he can gain the information he seeks. Although, as it turns out, it's pretty much useless to him, because it requires a light-sider to open. Although we get this stupid moment where Maul tries to fidget the holocron open, much like Ezra in the pilot, and is frustrated he can't open it, and the Ghost crew are easily able to break free and sneak under the damn ship.
Oh my god.
Are they just making things too easy for the good guys or what? They even put up a decent fight against Maul by magnetizing his legs and stuff, but he eventually breaks free, and he doesn't punish any of the three. He only angrily yells that they'll be kept alive as long as they're useful to him. We see meanwhile that Ezra meets Bendu for himself, and as it turns out, upon requesting the holocron back, Bendu put it deep into the spider cave, so Kanan's got to get Ezra to navigate the cave, since he can't bring his lightsaber. Why does this feel like a padded video game side quest? Anyways, to make a very long story short, they retrieve the holocron, and this is where Bendu gives them a final warning. One of them will need to open the holocron, but once a secret is known, it cannot be unknown. This warning, however, is not lived up to by anything. The pair speed over to Maul's rendezvous point, which is basically a mini Halo ring in the middle of nowhere, not a natural formation in the slightest. Upon meeting Maul, he lures the two away from each other, and he even secretly orders the rest of the Ghost crew to be executed. And it makes you wonder why in the hell he didn't do this earlier. When he's walking behind Kanan, he opts to try killing him again by shoving him out an airlock. What annoys me is how Kanan is caught off guard by all this. Kanan is able to survive and he does make it back inside with all the oxygen. Meanwhile, we see Maul order one of his droids to execute the hostages, and he gets Ezra to help him open both the holocrons, so he can gain the information he seeks. Now, I just wanted to point out how stupid it is that you can answer any question you want by combining a Jedi and Sith holocron together. That's not how holocrons work. This seems like they're really indulging that equal light and equal dark misconception by stating that if you balance the light with the dark, you will gain clarity, when in actuality, it'll do the opposite. Based on where the season is going, they just wanted Maul to find and confront Kenobi again, but couldn't figure out a way to do it believably. So they literally made up this stupid rule that combining Jedi and Sith holocrons will answer any question you seek. Gee, if it was that easy, why didn't Palps or Vader do this to get important information? You have to remember at the end of the day that after Order 66, Palpatine would have had access to countless Jedi holocrons, plus a bunch of Sith holocrons the Order had stored away. It makes you wonder why they didn't use this method to solve their problems. It would be an incredibly easy solution for Vader, for example, to figure out where Kenobi was. Even if it requires a light sider to open the Jedi side, the Empire captured plenty of Jedi. You could easily capture a Padawan in hiding, force them to open the holocron as a light sider, and then turn them to the dark side as an Inquisitor or something. Problem solved? I mean, at least the Inquisitors would be good for something, right? And they wouldn't be so damn useless. This is such a ridiculous rule to throw in, because now it's possible for any Force user to get any answer they seek. Again, you'd think that with something like this, Vader would have figured out where Kenobi was a long time ago. The implications of this is so batshit that it's literally a game changer. As far as I've seen, they literally only do this for Darth Maul to figure out where Kenobi is. Ugh. So as Kanan frees the Ghost Crew, they go to get Ezra, but by then it's too late and Maul gets what he wants before escaping. Ezra, however, does not discover a key to destroying the Sith, and I presume both the holocrons afterwards are busted. So with that being said, the only redeeming factor is that the visuals at the end were pretty nice, and that's it. That's the episode, and we have to wait until we see Maul again in this show. Next comes another filler episode, this time with Sabine in the lead. Although as a filler episode, it doesn't have anything to do with expanding on her. Basically, the setup is that the rebels are running short on pilots, but as it turns out, there's a brand new Fulcrum who has intel on Imperial pilots who wish to defect at a certain academy. Heir explains that there's multiple Fulcrum agents across the rebellion even if the original was Ahsoka. So yeah, Sabine is sent on a mission to get the wannabe defectors out. And that's where Sabine goes undercover somehow as an Imperial pilot. And we get our guest appearance of Wedge Antilles. I can at least say that they didn't copy-paste his backstory from the expanded universe and changed him into being an ex-Imperial pilot. A random detail I wanted to bring up is how Wedge in the Star Wars Aftermath book tells an Imperial when he's captured that the reason he joined the rebellion was because they were oppressive and they killed people, including, quote, a girl he loved once. I guess in the earliest signs of Filoni not taking other people's work into account, this girl he loved that was killed by the Empire is never mentioned. Wedge in fact seems mostly passive about defecting from the Empire. He doesn't have some hardline thing against them that is super personal. Wedge even mentions that he joined the Empire to get some fun action, and then changed his mind when the Empire turned out to be evil. This was a random detail from the book that I remember ironically better than anything else when I read the god-awful Star Wars Aftermath. So this is an issue with the episode when it comes to continuity in unison with a book. Remember that they promised that all content would be considered equal, regardless of accessibility. But here, you can tell that Chuck Wendig's novel was not a factor here. So with that being said, Sabine and the other cadets do a simulation that basically tells us the Empire is evil, as they simulate shooting an unarmed transport, and with that, Sabine after the fact reveals her true identity to Wedge, and they plan to bust themselves out. Governor Price along with Agent Kallus show up, and they root out the defectors when Ezra and friends show up to pick up Sabine, in which the TIE Fighter defectors break formation and try to escape, except it turns out the ships were rigged, and they're captured by the Empire before they can make it to Ezra and friends. Then, in the middle of detention, Wedge accidentally spills Sabine's name.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
And this is where Sabine is talked off by Governor Price. She recognizes Sabine as a former Imperial cadet, but bafflingly, Sabine actually manages to fight her way out of this whole situation, beating up the stormtroopers and Governor Price. She proceeds to roll over to the two pilots she was meant to extract, including Wedge, and the three of them escape. And it's here where we find out who the new Fulcrum is, when Agent Kallus shows up and gives the rebels advice on where to go, telling Sabine to tell Zeb that they're even. So Agent Kallus is a rebel spy now. Perfect. Minimal development equals a quick turnaround. I also find it really weird that Kallus managed to become Fulcrum very shortly after that episode with Zeb. Again, I don't know how much time has passed, but you can assume it's been a few months. Maybe. I don't know how the whole Fulcrum thing works, but I think it's a fat chance Agent Kallus would become one of them in a timely manner. If that's the case, then it seems like being Fulcrum is open to heavy abuse, either by the Empire looking to lure rebels into a trap, or a third party, who might want to trick the rebels for their own gain. Point is, Kallus becoming Fulcrum is bullshit. Anyways, Sabine and friends get picked up, and we have this ending, where the rebels manage to recruit 2 pissing pilots, which I doubt is anywhere near enough to account for their losses at the start of the episode, but they just hope you didn't notice that, and that's episode 4. Let's get on with episode 5, shall we? So this one's another Ryloth-focused episode. We again start at a point where I think we missed 10 minutes of a story, in which Cham and one of his buddies ride away from Imperial speeder bikes. The Ghost shows up just in time to save both of them, and a speeder bike pilot makes the mistake of entering the Ghost with at least 3 guns pointed at him. In that moment, your life is pretty much over, but the biker scout doesn't even try to quick shot any of the 3 rebels in front of him. Instead, he just stands there like an idiot and lets Zeb knock him out. Jesus Christ. And now the rebels have got a disguise, this time for Ezra to wear. So when we're finally given context, we learn that the Ghost made it past an Imperial blockade to give a supply run. Heir even says, quote, "It wasn't easy getting past that Imperial blockade," which of course we never get to see. They just wanted to skip right ahead to the main event. Anyways, Cham discusses with everyone how he and Hera's old home, the Tan province, has been captured by the Empire, with the Ryloth commander Slavin making uncharacteristically good strikes. As soon as I heard that, I knew immediately that it's not actually him doing a good job. It's Thrawn. Yeah, you can tell it's him. We were promised Thrawn, and we're getting Thrawn, or at least a cheap imitation of him. Anyways, the commander now has control of Hera's old home, and now he possesses the Kalakori, a totem that belongs to Hera and Chan's family line and whatnot. So basically, Hera makes it her personal mission to retrieve the Kalakori, not because it holds any value to the rebellion, but because it's super important symbolically. Okay, she does say it was important to her deceased mother, but that's about it. So the 2 groups proceed to ambush an Imperial patrol, while Ezra and Hera ride over to her old place. Ezra, in disguise as a scout trooper, manages to front a story about capturing a rebel on patrol, and it forces Hera to resort back to a French accent. You know, whenever I hear the Twi'leks speak like French people, I'm reminded of this scene from Chowder.
Pretty clever, eh, Pudge? Is she supposed to be French? No, she's supposed to be ugly. Oh, because French people are ugly? No. Ooh, if she's French, you should draw a beret. It'll help.
Oh my gosh. That poor little French girl has a mustache and a beard. I'm totally gonna vote for her out of pity.
I don't know why I was reminded of that. Anyways, upon entering the establishment, we get some backstory of Hera explaining the very wreck site she pulled Chopper out of. They managed to make it inside her old home, and it seems that past the point of being let in, there's zero security regulation to go through. The security seems really lax. Hera easily finds the Kalakori, and I have to ask, did they literally only just go to the estate or whatever just to collect this thing? You might as well do some damage by assassinating the commander or something. Because if you're here just to steal back a family item, then that's just a waste of effort. They never seem to seize the opportunity, even when trying to sneak out, with both the commander and Grand Admiral Thrawn appearing and conversing with one another. They actually managed to sneak past Grand Admiral Thrawn and Commander Slavin. And even though this stormtrooper probably would have clearly seen them from the angle he was facing, he doesn't say anything. But not to worry. Thrawn can easily tell there's intruders about. Cut back to the rest of the Ghost crew fending off an Imperial ambush. And the Walker does actually manage to shoot off Kanan and Sabine sharing a ride. Although the big Twi'lek dude is easily able to use a rocket launcher to block off Imperial forces, although it ends up being a complete waste a mere 10 seconds later or so. You could have just destroyed the Walker dude. They basically then discuss going over to help Hera and Ezra, and so they ride off. Cut back to Hera and Ezra. They dispatch Chopper as a distraction. Although it doesn't work because through the escape door is both Thrawn and Slavin walking through. Slavin assumes that Hera is a mere servant girl, although Thrawn recognizes who she actually is. But this isn't some grand outside-the-box observation Thrawn has, despite the writers trying to frame it as one. I mean, Hera has been caught on camera as far back as season 1. Also, the fact that he's specifically assigned to take the rebels down, he'd obviously see images of the rebels, including all of the Ghost crew. Like, Slavin not knowing makes sense because his fight against rebels is restricted to Ryloth, but Thrawn should know exactly who she is and what she looks like. I guess Thrawn makes the connection anyways when she's brought in for questioning. And this here is a poorly timed moment where Filoni flexes that he knows at least the bare minimum about Thrawn, by writing in one of his gimmicks in the scene, his appreciation for art. Despite the fact that he should already know about Hera Syndulla specifically, he basically recognizes the item that Hera stole as a Kalikori, describing what it is, and through this, figures out that Hera was stealing it for a personal reason, and so she must be Hera Syndulla. Again, it shouldn't be rocket science. And it doesn't make sense how Thrawn doesn't already have a briefing on the Ghost crew. This is just a scene thrown in to fulfill a quota based on a filthy casual's understanding of Thrawn. This is so forced too, because you can tell that this is deliberately done to introduce us to Thrawn's love of art for preschoolers. He spouts that crap about how knowing art is like knowing your enemy, blah blah blah, and I'm just underwhelmed. They also write Slavin as an exaggerated, incompetent commander, just so Thrawn will look better for the audience. This is so lazy. This is the stupidest way to make Thrawn look competent. Just put him against someone completely unqualified. In the Thrawn trilogy, Thrawn interacted with all sorts of different people with different skill sets and experience, and he was able to outsmart all of them, and always demonstrated who's higher in authority. So far, Thrawn has been in a meeting suggesting a plan that isn't rocket science, and now here, where he demonstrates his love for art to identify someone he should already know about. Also, something I have to wonder too, is why Thrawn seems to be relatively unknown to the rebels when he's first introduced. Did his rise through the ranks seen in the Thrawn novel mean nothing? Wouldn't he already have a reputation? I mean, this made sense in the Thrawn trilogy, because Thrawn was mostly absent for most of the Galactic Civil War, out in the unknown regions doing shit. So it made sense when characters like Han Solo hadn't heard of him, when he started causing shit for the New Republic. You can also infer that his record was swept under the rug because of his alien heritage. But here, in a far more woke and accepting empire, it's clear that Thrawn should be decently well known. But as Ezra says in this very episode, he refers to Thrawn as the blue guy, which is such a filthy casual way of naming Thrawn. Anyways, I'm not impressed with Thrawn so far. We also see him quick-shot Ezra when he tries to make a move. Again, am I supposed to be super impressed by Thrawn's ability to see through a disguise? I also want to note that he sees through Ezra, although he doesn't catch on to Chopper. So I guess Thrawn isn't that clever. We see in the next scene, when Hera and Ezra are thrown into a cell, Thrawn basically insults Hera by deciding to transport the Kalikori to a ship to make it part of his collection. And then there's his infamous out-of-character moment. Slavin suggests just destroying the totem dismissively and then...
Say what again? Say what again? I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker. Say what one more goddamn time.
Yeah, Thrawn loses his cool for a moment and grabs Slavin, before calming down and remarking how he forgot that not everyone appreciates art as he does. If there was ever a scene that utterly failed to understand Thrawn, this would be it. Thrawn never loses his cool, and this is an out-of-character reaction. It's not even like Slavin was anywhere close to pushing Thrawn to the edge. He just says something that Thrawn doesn't like, and he loses his cool. I have no idea why this was thrown in. If you're adapting Thrawn, you should know that he never gets angry. I think a more realistic reaction would be,
We should just destroy that piece of Twi'lek trash.
You are quite the fool, Commander. I would advise you strongly reconsider your approach towards art. There is no room for mistakes, even when one has the natural advantage.
Thrawn fans will be watching Filoni like a hawk, and he can't afford to get something like this so blatantly wrong. I can't help but have this feeling that this is Filoni's arrogance at daring Thrawn fans who read the books to come at him. Maybe I'm just seeing things, but this is a very deliberate writing choice that presents Thrawn out of character briefly. So Slavin gets Cham to give himself up after announcing his daughter's capture, although Chopper rigs the entire base without anyone noticing or catching on, and all Thrawn does is wait on the Chimera as the rebels inevitably blow the place up. He also does the whole let them go, they've earned their victory cliche on top of that. Seriously, it's as if Thrawn just gave up trying to thwart the rebels halfway through. I mean, it's shown that he clearly expected something like this and did nothing to counteract it. That's not clever, that's dumb. Plus the fact that he lets them off so easily. This is moronic. Thrawn just couldn't be bothered, could he? Anyone who's read the Thrawn trilogy should see what the problem is. The writers certainly did not bring on their A-game, and I think it's because they knew they weren't good enough to write Thrawn in a sloppy manner where he has a huge oversight. So what did they do? Just have him intentionally let the rebels off and not interfere with Slavin's terrible plans. Since the show is so attached to the rebels winning every single time, they've got to scale back Thrawn's involvement when they win. Instead of, I don't know, maybe forcing themselves to get more clever with their writing. It's the classic saying, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Anyways, they wrap up the episode with Heir talking about how her family will always be the ghost crew, and she doesn't need the totem after all, blah blah blah. Next episode, please. So the following episode isn't that bad actually. I'd say it's kinda decent, and it's ironically the episode that's meant to be a direct callback to the Clone Wars in every way. The episode starts with another pointless setup, with the rebels needing more supplies. Gee, where have I seen that before? So right off the bat, I was bored out of my mind. But then the episode sort of picked up by having Rex, Kanan, Ezra, and Zeb captured by a ray shield and knocked out. They are brought to Kalani. Yeah, you remember that super tactical droid from the Clone Wars, right? Appeared in the Onderon arc and didn't do much aside from executing King Rash at the end. Well, he appears again, along with his droid battalion. Rex points out that the droid army received a shutdown command after Order 66. He assumed it was a Republic trick and prevented the shutdown specific to the planet they're on. So basically, Kalani challenges the four of them to a quote-unquote final battle to determine the victor of the Clone Wars. Ezra and Kanan as Jedi and Rex as a clone trooper will make for a sufficient strike team. Basically, they have to play the droid's game in order to finally determine a winner to the Clone Wars. They accept this offer, with Zeb staying behind as a hostage because, quote, the Lasats weren't involved in the Clone Wars, and basically, it's a game of hunt almost. This episode has a lot of undertones to the Clone Wars, including moments where Ezra talks about what the Clone Wars must have been like and whatnot. There are some details I like, for example, the fact that the droids are old, and the destroyer droids have malfunctioning and old-ass shields, and that makes them vulnerable. Still though, this episode is mostly a fillery waste of time. As the real threat, the Empire shows up, and Ezra proposes to Kalani that their real enemy is the Empire because of the logic that the Republic became the Empire. Kalani agrees with this logic, and so the two sides team up to escape. They get on shuttles that I'm surprised still have fuel, and cause some destruction to Imperial walkers to escape. Despite previously chastising Ezra, Rex then congratulates Ezra for technically ending the Clone Wars at last, and so on and so forth. So the episode wasn't very good, but the enjoyment I had out of it was probably the most I could expect out of the show. They also play the Clone Wars theme in the credits, because they wanted to make this a full callback. I guess the commentary on how neither side won and the game was rigged was a nice touch, but overall, this episode was just dumb but fun. It was nice seeing the battle droid banter, and Chopper managed to not be as annoying as he usually is, but unfortunately, they easily resolved the lost Phantom thing by having the escape shuttle become the Phantom 2.0. Speaking of, what was the point of losing the first Phantom exactly? You know what? Let's not ponder on that, and we'll just get to the next episode. So yeah, after the shit with Fen Rao in the last season, we're getting an episode featuring him again. It starts with Sabine and Rao playing a game that resembles Pop-Up Pirate, which for those who don't know, is a game I played when I was younger where you must insert a sword, and if the pirate, well, pops out of the barrel, you lose. It's a game based purely on luck, as it's randomized every single time. So I guess the equivalent they're playing here is Blast Out Mandalore, a game that I'll assume every Mandalorian kid played. Bobby Fett probably played it with his dad. Anyways, after some conversation about Fen Rao's loyalty to Mandalore, Zeb calls both Sabine and Rao to the command center, because apparently the protectors on Conquered Dawn have stopped responding to the rebels, indicating that they've lost contact. So they send Ezra and Sabine along with Fen Rao down to the planet, and to make a long story short, Ezra gets distracted by the sight of the shattered planet, and Fen Rao seizes the opportunity to knock both Ezra and Sabine out. But you want to know what happens in the next scene? Chopper, who somehow wasn't deactivated, uncuffs both Ezra and Sabine. Why Fen Rao didn't kill both Ezra and Sabine and Chopper to ensure his escape, I have no idea. But that's not the point. When Ezra and Sabine get out, they see Fen Rao staring up the top of a hill, and upon meeting his point of view, they see the entire Protector base has been scorched. Yep. Again, the gap between Season 2 and 3 is completely unspecified. So who the hell knows how long Fen Rao was in Rebel custody? Fen Rao is absolutely pissed. And yeah, that's understandable. As I said in my Rebel Season 2 review, they gave the impression that they didn't necessarily need to have Conquered Dawn as a route. They just hyper stuck to it after the Protectors gave them some shit. It's not like the Rebel pilots who died in that episode mattered anyways. After taking out an Imperial probe droid that was spying on them, Fen Rao foolishly announces to Sabine afterwards that he's going to stay on Conquered Dawn and deal with the Imperials himself, even revealing that he'll use the Rebel base as a bargaining chip. Why in the hell he'd announce that to Sabine, I have no idea. There's no time to argue, however, as Imperial Mandalorians show up shortly after, including a dude in red armor. They manage to search the area and capture Ezra with minimal effort, and the red dude takes off his helmet and tells Ezra that he is Gar Saxon, Imperial Viceroy of Mandalore. He's voiced by the late Ray Stevenson, who also played Baylan Skoll in Ahsoka. I paid tribute to the guy in a community post, and since the actor is no longer with us, I'm gonna try and moderate what I say about Gar Saxon. Because to be honest, I didn't like what I saw. Gar Saxon is another antagonist thrown into the show. I've started to notice that they don't use Thrawn all the time, and that only tells me that they're too afraid to put him in every episode because he's gonna have to lose big time at some point. I think Saxon is a weak-ass villain. He isn't particularly incompetent or stupid to the extent of previous villains in this show, but he ain't exactly no Hans Gruber. Ezra starts acting like a smug shit-talker, not taking Saxon or his peers seriously. And I guess to Saxon's credit, he does threaten to shoot Chopper. Now, does he actually go through with it? Not really. He feigns some shots at Chopper, and Ezra makes up a story about how his name is Lando Calrissian and he's a smuggler. Okay, after that, he does get Ezra to spill the beans. It's also worth noting that Sabine and Fen Rao have been listening in at a distance, and doing so, Saxon goes on a rant about how he always planned to execute the Protectors, and hearing that he always intended that, Fen Rao has a change of heart. Now that doesn't really explain why he'd suddenly give a shit about the rebels, but I guess the show's got to achieve what it wants, no matter how flimsy it is. Despite being called Imperial Super Commandos, the titular soldiers are pathetically weak, as Fen Rao knocks one of them out, with Sabine taking the dude's jetpack for herself. Fen Rao also overwhelms one of them rather quickly, And cutting back to the interrogation, Saxon prepares to destroy Chopper, but Ezra then uses the Force to cause Saxon's aim to go off balance and miss. And of course, he finds out that Ezra's a Jedi. But before he has any time to think about it, Sabine ambushes the lot. And we see how stupid it is that Saxon removed his helmet. Fenn Rau actually ditches both Ezra and Sabine, but don't worry, he comes back at the end. Gar Saxon gives Sabine the chance to surrender, and taunts her with some crap about her mother. By that, I don't mean he was making a yo mama joke. I mean that he was using Sabine's mother to grandstand her. Sabine, of course, gets Chopper to play some ear-splitting music. Then we get a jetpack chase sequence where we see how useless the Imperial Super Commandos are. Yeah. Eventually, Sabine, Ezra, and Chopper go over to Gar Saxon's ship in an attempt to steal it. And I wish I was making this up, but Sabine actually has a fist fight with Saxon, and manages to beat him, despite Saxon having both the advantage of age and gender. Saxon should have easily beaten her, and taken any punches she pulled. Seriously, what is it with girls being able to defeat full-grown men in combat? I was taken out of the story when Sabine was able to overpower someone who was obviously way stronger than she was. A well-built man, who despite being on the somewhat older side, has the obvious advantage. Now I clearly see another problem with the villains. They can't even beat less experienced kids who aren't even 18 yet. Aging up the characters would have been nice, wouldn't it? So any potential the villains have are completely wasted. Anyways, Fenn Rau shows up in the end to help the rebels, and they get away, with conveniently Gar Saxon surviving out of his entire group, because that's how blatant the plot armor is. Fenn Rau joins the rebellion, and that's the episode. Ugh. Next episode, please. So we're dropped into another random scenario with episode 8. It's another filler episode, by the way. This is where we meet the most stubborn rebels ever. Upon arriving at this random planet with a rebel presence, the Ghost helps a freighter take out some Imperial ships. So they find out that the freighter identifies itself as the Ion Squadron. When the Ghost crew discuss it with Commander Sato, he recognizes the squadron as being that of his brothers, although his brother is now dead. But this seems to confirm that his nephew, Mart Matten, is still alive, especially since it was a kid who was on the other line with the Ghost. Oh great, more kids entering the rebellion, is it? That seems to be a theme we've run into with Filoni, that he thinks it's okay for kids to enter violent, intense conflicts like wars.
So uncivilized.
Based on what Commander Sato says, Mart never responded to his uncle's transmissions, and that tells me right away that Mart is completely unintimidated by the Empire. Just like I am in this show. Anyways, we also see when the Ghost crew docks with Mart's ship, we see that Mart's friends along with Mart himself don't care about the rough state of their ship. The hyperdrive doesn't work, for example, and Mart's friend responds that they don't even need a hyperdrive. And when we meet Mart himself, he's just as careless as his buddies. Mart is presumably around Ezra's age, and he's not scared of the Empire, and still thinks he can cause a ruckus to Imperials even with his damaged ship. And they pretty much refuse the offer to go to the main rebel fleet. So anyways, Thrawn is surprisingly in this episode. If I couldn't be unimpressed enough, Thrawn is told all that he needs to, that being that he's facing minimal rebel forces. This is no Thrawn trilogy situation of there being multiple downsides for the Empire. So what does Thrawn do? He sends Admiral Constantine and one light cruiser to deal with the rebels. Admiral Constantine of course questions Thrawn on his questionable strategy, and Thrawn passively taunts Constantine that he's a chicken if he's not up to it. And this is enough to make Constantine obey Thrawn.
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
Yeah, we don't even get a scene where Thrawn explains his brilliant plan. And that's because there is no brilliant plan. This is just nonsense disguised as Thrawn knowing what he's doing. Also another thing, Thrawn isn't engaging the rebel fleet himself. Instead, he's sending a middleman to do the stuff for him. Given Admiral Constantine's track record so far, I'm not exactly sure he can be trusted to even abide by Thrawn's orders properly, which begs the question on why the hell Thrawn is sending him specifically to go after the rebels. They seem to write Thrawn in a way where none of the blame can fall on him if the rebels win. At least how the writers see it. Anyhow, we see Ezra, Sabine and Chopper fix the Iron Squadron's hyperdrive, even though they didn't want it fixed. They kinda just skipped over a scene where it feels like the Iron Squadron allowed Ezra and friends at least fix the hyperdrives. Also, Mart's friends are easily persuaded to see things Ezra's way, which is way too easy. Fixing the hyperdrive doesn't do anything anyways, because Mart switches power back to the guns and shields. They try to convince Mart to ditch the ship, but instead he pretends like he's going along with them before detaching the airlock between his ship and the Phantom and decides to try and take on the Imperial light cruiser himself. And it goes as well as you expect. The Phantom then jumps into hyperspace, and the Rebel fleet gathers to go back for Mart. And with the entire Rebel fleet, they're easily able to disable the light cruiser, and by the time Thrawn shows up, the Rebels are pretty much mapping in their hyperspace escape route. There is a brief conversation between Thrawn and Commander Sato, but that's about it. The rebels get away, and I just found it hilarious how they try to frame Admiral Constantine as the incompetent one who let the rebels get away. Like, Thrawn, you were the one who ordered him to arrive in one ship, and you knew about the dude's lacking skill set at that. You should share blame too for the rebels' escape. When I watched this episode, I was somewhat expecting Thrawn to pull out some secret trap card, but instead, we have him send a middleman to do his work for him. Someone who was shown as unqualified, and then Thrawn has the nerve to grandstand the guy when he doesn't succeed. Admiral Constantine never did a dent with a Star Destroyer. What made you think he could with a light cruiser? Thrawn in this show is just as poor of a decision maker as Elon Musk is with Twitter. And to emphasize again, Thrawn has way more resources than his expanded universe counterpart did in his titular trilogy. Pathetic. We get a closing scene with Mart and his uncle Commander Sato and his buddies, and that's the episode. So come episode 9, we get another filler episode, except this time with Hondo. As one of the few Filoni-verse characters I like, he prevents this episode from being boring. To be honest, I actually thought this episode was actually pretty funny. As it turns out, Hondo's partnered up with the fat slob who tried to kill him last season, and everyone except Ezra is reluctant to trust him. But the rebels need proton bombs. And so the cargo transport they're trying to rob has that, while Hondo and Fat Slob get all the treasure on board. So yeah, the entire episode is humorous banter between Hondo and the others, and I actually enjoyed it for what it's worth. It's a complete waste of time in the overall story, but this is the rare time I actually enjoyed the experience. Makes me wish Hondo was used more, but from what I remember, comic relief is better used in small doses. It's just a shame that none of the other characters work as well as Hondo does. The whole thing is pretty much a video game side quest, so basically my criticism is that this is a filler episode, but Hondo made me not hate it. There isn't much to say aside from that. Now let's get on with episode 10. Titled An Inside Man. We start right on Lothal, and I guess the Imperial blockade is back, so the show can't make up its mind. Anyways, Ezra and Kanan are established as waiting for Ryder, who when he does arrive, goes on a rampage. And it's another montage of the Empire failing to get a scratch on the rebels. In fact, it becomes even easier, as while being chased, Ryder remarks how the bike speeders have been sabotaged. So when the Imperials get fast enough, the engine overheats and blows up. Oh, so Michael Bay is the saboteur. Should have known.
Awesome barbecue, awesome pull.
Yeah, you should never trust filmmaking genius Michael Bay to make the speeders. So then Ryder takes Ezra and Kanan to the hideout somewhere in the middle of Lothal. And we meet a character who did nothing in season 1, Mr. Sumar. The dude who had his farm taken by the Empire. He's now a small-time rebel, helping in sabotaging the speeders. So the mission ends up being to destroy the Imperial factory on Lothal, and the plan is as simple and dumb as ever. Ezra asks Sumar if he can get them into the factory, and Sumar responds that he doesn't even know. Then we just cut to Ezra and Kanan with Sumar inside the factory with perfect disguises to boot. Did we just skip a scene? Or did the writers just want to make things too easy? As usual. This happens so often that I honestly don't know what I could say come the millionth time it happens. If anything, this tells me that the writers are lazy. But I think you already know that. Let's just get on with it since you already know what's wrong. The trio go into a lineup, and it's here where Agent Kallus and Governor Price show up. Now, a little nitpicky here, but Ezra remarks that, quote, Kallus has a new boss, indicating that he doesn't recognize the governor of Lothal, and that's just weird. Governor Price was referenced way back in Season 1, so are you telling me that the people of Lothal don't even know what their governor looks like? This is a lack of attention to detail. Like, I remember in the Thrawn novel, that people didn't actually know what the Emperor truly looked like, and Eli Vanto nearly pissed himself upon learning that the Emperor looked nothing like the propaganda, but instead commanded an aura of pure evil around him. But I'm pretty sure the people from Lothal should know what their leader looks like. Imagine meeting an American who doesn't know what the president looks like. They've all been particularly memorable in the last 20 years. Nervous George, Mr. Obamacare, the War Guy, and Joe Biden my dick off. So the trio have got masks over their faces to disguise themselves. Thrawn comes in, and he knows that the stuff in the factory has been sabotaged. Now, given this is Thrawn, he'd piece together that rebel influence has something to do with it. And upon seeing the masked workers, he'd ask them to unmask themselves. But ooh, if he did that, Thrawn would recognize Ezra. Yeah, it seems Thrawn's outside the box thinking commonly displayed in the Thrawn trilogy only happens when the writers want it to. In all of his scenes, Thrawn was always alert and thinking critically and outside the box without a single exception. And the one time he made a mistake, or rather an oversight, it cost him his life. That's why I appreciated Thrawn's death scene so much, because it further demonstrated how brilliant Thrawn was. It was so artistically done at the end of the day. This seems like a massive oversight, with some workers unmasked and others not. It seems like it would be easier for spies to get in that the Empire doesn't recognize. And given they skipped the scene of them actually getting inside the factory, I can only assume security is lax, even under Thrawn. So with that being said, Thrawn speaks to Mr. Sumar and asks him to personally test the last speeder he assembled. And I guess you're supposed to go, oh shit, but this isn't exactly rocket science. I imagine any brutal Imperial commander could have thought of this, making the workers test the vehicles before deployment. So Mr. Sumar is basically forced to get on the speeder bike and demonstrate it going to full speed. And as the saboteur, the speeder bike overheats, and Sumar is not allowed to get off before it's too late.
And it's gone.
Then Thrawn tells the remaining workers to test what they make personally, obviously to prevent sabotage. We're 10 episodes after his debut, and we still don't have anything to be impressed about regarding Thrawn. He's been so underwhelming. The imitation is basic at best, and you can tell Filoni only did so much as skim through the source material. I guess the main checklists have been done, like appreciation for art, check, blue skin and red eyes, sort of check since you gave him pupils, high ranking status, check. They've done the bare minimum. Thrawn was only put in for marketing appeal, and he sure as shit hasn't been done justice. Anyways, Thrawn enforces a lockdown, no one in or out, and leaves the room. Just as the Imperials prepare to do an ID check, and of course Thrawn can't be present for this, because that would make it harder for the rebels to get out of this jam. Ezra orders Chopper to make a distraction, and it allows Ezra and Kanan to run. And they even bump into 2 stormtroopers and knock them out with one punch. I guess stormtrooper helmets really are made of plastic. Thrawn comes back in, and he references that he streamlined a project for a new fighter ship, and also arrests another worker for sabotage. Cutting back to Ezra and Kanan, now that they're in their new disguises, they see that the locked off area of the factory requires a clearance code. And just as Kanan says that they'll need to get one off an Imperial droid, what he just described shows up behind them. And Kanan, disguised as a stormtrooper, takes the clearance code off the droid, and Chopper can roll in. Damn, is the security so lax. They're not even gonna check the droid, and they're only gonna have 2 stormtroopers guarding the entrance. This is so lazy. So Chopper is able to get in without much trouble. We cut back to Thrawn, observing his whole art collection, because of course he is. Kallus and an Imperial goon come in to inform him about the 2 missing workers, who are likely now in Imperial disguises and gathering intel. So Thrawn orders security increased tenfold in the super secret area. Soon afterwards, the pair bolt as soon as Chopper returns, and Kallus shows up by the elevator to save the day. And for some reason, Sabine didn't inform anyone that Kallus is the new Fulcrum. And so the pair assume that he's still loyal to the Empire, and this leads to quite a mess. The pair, after beating up Kallus for a bit, learns that he's Fulcrum after he gives out the passphrase. And so they infiltrate a room to gather the intel they need. They then proceed to contact Ryder, who is over by the East Gate ready to bail them out. And Kallus, since he's a spy, stays behind. Thrawn and Price, meanwhile, talk about what the rebels are doing. And Thrawn figures out based on their specific actions that they likely had help from a spy, or an inside man. Oh wow, we're almost at the end of episode 10, and now we've got Thrawn thinking ahead? I was about to give up hope. Still, figuring out that there's a spy isn't that impressive. And I don't know if I'm missing some bad writing here. Still, Thrawn finds out about the East Gate escape plan anyways, and then the escape sequence with shenanigans happening, which results in the pair escaping. Mr. Sumar's wife or farming assistant or whoever finds out that he's dead, and along with Ryder, they escape. They've got the Imperial plans for Thrawn's sponsored project, later named the TIE Defender. And I just scoffed here, but when the pair reveal to the other rebels that Kallus is Fulcrum, everyone, including Sabine, is surprised. What? Did you just forget the help Kallus provided you in that episode with Wedge Antilles? Ugh, whatever. We then get a final scene with Thrawn informing both Price and Kallus about he knows they have a spy in their midst, and that they're gonna find the spy, blah blah, and that's the episode. So in the episode after that, Ezra gets another debriefing for another pointless mission, when he starts seeing a vision of Maul. He sees Maul all over the base, and it distracts him from the debriefing. Eventually, he thinks he sees Maul, who in actuality is a random rebel extra whom we never refer to again. Yeah, so with that being said, Ezra and Kanan go to seek advice from Bendu, who just like last time, speaks in riddles. Ezra tells Bendu about his problem, and then speak of the devil, Maul shows up, and it isn't a vision this time. Bendu disappears because I guess he just isn't interested in being in a heated discussion. So far, I've failed to see the point in Bendu. Anyways, Maul puts Ezra and Kanan in a sticky situation because he reveals he's planted a beacon on the planet, and if it goes off, the Empire will be alerted to the rebels in this base. Keep in mind that this beacon is never referenced again after a while. So Maul tells Ezra that they must go somewhere to complete what they were doing with the holocrons, but Ezra has no choice but to comply. Fortunately, Ezra's comm wrist has a tracker on it that Sabine implanted earlier in the episode, so she and Kanan track Ezra to the Dathomir system. When I saw that Dathomir was the destination, I just scoffed. Apparently this is one of Maul's hideouts. Maul gives a little bit of backstory about the planet to Ezra, and walking in with them, we see that Maul's got a little bit of a collection here, including the Darksaber. Ugh, I fucking knew that they were gonna reintroduce this gimmicky weapon given we've got Sabine, who is a Mandalorian, or at least a poor excuse for one. Maul pours in a potion for the both of them to drink. They do their cheers and they drink it. As such, they both get the answers they seek, which is mutually the same thing ironically, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Maul realizes the planet with the 2 suns he sees is Tatooine. Anyways, turns out that the Night Sister spirits have been disturbed due to the casting of the spell, and the 2 are forced to avoid being possessed. Kanan and Sabine run in, and the ghosts possess the both of them. Damn, the 10th Ghostbusters movie looks horrible. So basically, Maul offers Ezra to come with him and forget about his friends. Ezra obviously refuses, and Maul just leaves. You know how I said they made things too easy for the good guys? Well, it turns out Ezra performs an exorcism on Sabine by just pushing her out of range to where the Night Sister spirits can inhabit the body. And then he runs in to do the same thing to Kanan. and it turns out the solution is just destroying the Night Sister thing where the ghost first popped up. Always, things are made far too easy for the good guys, and I was incredibly underwhelmed. Makes you wonder why Maul didn't do this to avoid the risk of being possessed. Then the episode ends with Sabine collecting the Darksaber, and that's the episode. I sure as shit didn't have much to say about it, but it was the kind of episode where they just go one step forward with the plot. One tiny step forward. They're just padding things out as always. So next, we've got a two-parter concerning Geonosis. After they skipped over the planet in Season 2, by instead dedicating some time to one of its moons that no one cares about, here, they're actually going to Geonosis this time. The Imperial Space Station from last season is not present here, nor is anything Imperial in nature. In fact, don't worry about the Empire at all. They're a no-show in this episode. Anyways, Commander Sato and Bail Organa discuss that there's a missing rebel team that was sent to the world, and they haven't reported back in 2 cycles, so the Ghost Crew's got to investigate after them. They land in the middle of a sandstorm, with Ezra, Kanan, Rex, and Chopper being sent out to scout the last known location of the rebel team. And since nothing good ever comes from going into the underground tunnels, the group go into the underground tunnels. Inside, they find a bunch of helmets and equipment belonging to the team. They are blocked off with communication with Heir, and they ultimately vote to proceed. I found this uninteresting the whole way through. Eventually they come across battle droids, who attack them, and so they've got to fend them off. Battle droids are super random, and I have to say that the episode with Kalani made more sense in that regard. It's also worth noting that the battle droids in this episode are shown to be at full power, unlike Kalani's droid Legion. This honestly feels like a video game. This is something I'd see in Jedi Survivor. After a brief action sequence, guess who shows up? It's Saw Gerrera, the eventual leader of the Partisans.
The 3 of us this morning. I'm the only one this evening, but I must go on. The frontiers are my prison. Oh, the wind is blowing through the graves. The wind is blowing. Freedom soon will come. Then will come from the shadows.
Yep, another guest appearance with a character from the Clone Wars, although obviously he more closely resembles his Rogue One self. I was always confused on Saw Gerrera's age, but anyways, Rex and Saw greet each other because, you know, they met on Onderon. I didn't like how when we meet Saw, he's in a relatively cheery mood, despite the fact that he just lost his entire team. It probably ultimately doesn't matter, but there's no attention to detail in the show, or in Disney canon in general, I guess. So yeah, we've got Sabine and Zeb scouting out to the surface amidst a huge sandstorm. There's a bunch of generic dialogue, and man, do I really hate the way the characters talk in Rebels. It feels too much like a cartoon. And yes, I know, Rebels is a cartoon, but you know what I mean. They come across a shield generator, which hints towards something going on here. Back underground, Saw speculates there must be a Geonosian bug that survived, and was able to reactivate all the battle droids. He came because he's curious on why the Empire wiped out the population. And yeah, it's the Death Star. I called it immediately, but still, I was just fucking sick of this episode by this point. To sum all this shit up, Sabine and Zeb extract the shield generator, and by Kanan's warning to Hera that they transmitted to Sabine and Zeb, turns out there's a bunch of battle droids in the area. And once the storm ends, they go online and attack the pair, and they take cover in the shield generator they extracted. Back underground, Ezra and friends detect the Geonosian causing trouble, and chase after him, which, to make a long story short, they destroy the device the bug is using to command the battle droids, and they're all deactivated on the surface. And Saw begins to aggressively question the bug on what's going on, and why the Empire wiped out his people. But if you want to know what happens next, tune in next time. Ugh, I hate this show. This cliffhanger was not earned in the slightest. They don't even give us an interesting hook or reveal. Rather, it's just, you want to see the rest of this pointless story play out? Well, too bad, we're cutting it in two. If you've got a problem with that, tough. Does part 2 manage to pick up this worthless story? No! Yeah, sorry if I gave you nightmares, but I wanted to emphasize the point that they didn't do any better. Part 2 also bored me to hell and back. So anyways, they quickly try to humanize the bug when Ezra communicates with them. And they pulled that shit out of, it was only defending itself and it's alone, blah blah. And this is where Saw Gerrera cuffs the bug and forces him to take him to his base of operations, while conveniently dropping the hologram that contains his final lasting memory of his sister. Looking at the hologram, Steeler here doesn't look fully rendered, which yeah, that's Star Wars Rebels for you. Anyways, at the bug's hideout, they conveniently are to boost a stronger signal and contact the ghost for a pickup. As well as this, the Imperials show up, and as always they do a terrible job. Like there's this part where 2 TIE bombers do their magic on the stationary ghost, but they somehow missed, and the ghost doesn't suffer any lasting damage. That's pretty lazy, but whatever. It's also revealed that the bug was hiding an egg, which is perhaps the last hope for his people. I didn't find myself caring about any of this. In fact, I recall the egg being dropped once, and it didn't crack, meaning that it wasn't that fragile. Basically, the episode has the ghost pick up everyone underground while an Imperial ship goes after them, and it becomes a video game wipeout round with jet troopers being taken out. And they try to have a conflict with Saw willing to destroy the egg if he doesn't get what he wants, but again, it's not interesting. I know I said this, but honestly, I was just bored watching this episode. It doesn't add to anything. It's just the Saw Gerrera 2-parter that doesn't add anything to the show. We've still got the Empire being useless, and it seems every opportunity to take out the Rebels ends in failure because the Rebels are just so cool, and smart, and cool. Ugh. Since this 2-parter doesn't add anything to the overall story, and that's shocking since this is after all a 2-parter that just waste our time, let's just get on with the next episode. So the next episode, titled Warhead, has an Imperial Star Destroyer launch probes across the galaxy, and one of them just happens to come across Chopper Base. For some reason, instead of an actual probe droid, we instead get a defenseless protocol droid, who shortly after leaving its pod is attacked by the spiders. Anyways, as it turns out, this is a Zeb-based episode, as Hera is going out on a mission with the Ghost crew and leaves Zeb in charge of the base, with Chopper and AP5 to keep him company. Yeah, the stars of this episode are Zeb, and the 2 annoying droids. Zeb complains about how bored he'll be since he's being left behind, and I just scoffed. Boredom? Is that the best they could come up with? Also, Zeb is just reminding me of how I feel watching this show. As soon as the ghost leaves, we see that AP5 is just as much of a dick as Chopper. AP5 remarks that Zeb seems like a big dumb brute and not a leader. Zeb again makes his grunting sound, and yeah, I really wish Steve Blum wasn't in the show as much as he was. By now, I've gotten sick of listening to his voice. So basically Zeb decides to go to the command center while the 2 droids count crates or whatever. Woo. After being informed that one of the beacons has been disrupted around a certain sector of the base, Zeb calls Chopper to come with them, but the fussy droid refuses. Zeb then says that if he doesn't want to go, he'll help AP5 with his boring task, and we get AP5 calling Chopper for help. But Chopper's made up his mind in the ultimatum. Instead of helping his best friend, he'll just do what sounds less boring.
Wow, what an asshole.
I hate Chopper with a burning passion. His erratic nature is not funny, charming, clever, witty, or anything. He just comes across as a nuisance. A nuisance voiced by Dave Filoni, no less. Anyways, they go to replace the beacon, and they find the spiders in the probe droid. Zeb realizes that the droid in question is not one of theirs, but decides to take it back to their base. I mean, he does remark that it doesn't look Imperial, but that doesn't automatically mean that it's not Imperial. It could also possibly belong to pirates or something. So Zeb's decision here is misguided. He found a droid, realized it wasn't one that belonged to Chopper Base, but still decided to take it in. This is just irresponsible. Chopper actually makes a good judgment call when he suggests trashing it, but Zeb uses his authority as a temporary leader of the base to overrule Chopper's input, but it's framed in a way where it seems like Chopper's just being annoying. Now, maybe I could overlook a bad decision like this if this was a one-off, but this show is full of characters making bad decisions. This is just something to add to the list. We cut to the Star Destroyer with an officer telling Agent Kallus about the droid, identified as an infiltrator that hasn't reported back. Apparently this is worth reporting because it hasn't transmitted its location. I find this strange because does that mean that the probe wasn't sent to a specific destination or had a tracker on it? Someone tell me I'm nitpicking, because this just seems like another oversight in the writing. But then again, this is the same show that again has bad decision made after another. Then the ultimate incompetent decision comes in. Zeb brings in the droid, asking AP5 to identify it, and he recognizes it as an older model. They power it up again, and upon asking the droid for its designation, it replies that it's unknown. He then scans the depot, and instead of realizing that it might be scanning the base for intel for a shady party like the Empire, Zeb instead decides that the droid will be a useful assistant to AP5.
Stupid! You're so stupid!
My god. Does this brute have no concept of red flags? He finds a droid that he realizes isn't with the Alliance, he brings it in, it cannot recall its designation, and its first action after being turned on is to scan its surroundings. Ugh, this is such lazy writing. So since Zeb allowed the suspicious droid to stick around, he's then called to the command center, in which Fulcrum, or Agent Kallus, reports the infiltrator droid. And this is where Zeb realizes he done goof. Gee, Zeb required Fulcrum's intel to bail him out, instead of common sense. I hate this show. So anyways, Zeb runs over, tells AP5 to get out of the way, but is slow to shoot it. That the infiltrator has time to identify itself as an Imperial droid, and then transform itself into a beast machine. This is the sort of thing that would probably sell as a toy if it didn't appear in only one episode. So yeah, the droid transforms into its combat mode and attacks the trio. It has ninja skills, almost like the Magna Guards in Republic Commando, and does flips and shit. And even an attempted shock from Chopper does nothing to it. Zeb only damages it a little bit, but it ultimately gets away, albeit leaking from the damage. AP5 recommends contacting Heir on this important development, but because Zeb is a total moron, he dismisses that idea, and says they'll dedicate their time to hunting the infiltrator. Yeah, so he's not even going to contact Heir on this potential compromise of this base, and they didn't even try to alert the base to an infiltrator. No alarms going off means that the infiltrator has free reign to do what it needs to do. You know, why didn't Zeb activate an alarm while he was at the command center, when Fulcrum first informed him about the darn infiltrator? So anyways, Zeb decides to send out Chopper to find the droid, provoke it, and then lure it back so he can grab it, and AP5 can deactivate it. Chopper does so, and Zeb has a little wrestling match with the droid, in which after being deactivated with AP5 taking its sweet time, the droid has a countdown timer to self-destruction. Oddly enough, Zeb doesn't panic when he realizes it's going to blow, even when told that it's got 20 seconds left. However, Chopper kind of saves the day when he freezes the countdown timer with a freeze ray that he magically has, and I don't remember him having it in any other episode. Now they've got time to figure out how to solve this mess. Upon learning that the memory core is protected, they'll decide they'll send it back to the Empire, with the countdown still active. And hopefully it'll blow up before transmitting data on the Rebel base. Zeb still doesn't contact Heir about all this, but with that being said, they reactivate the droid and let it return to its ship, destroy the long-range transmitter, and what happens? Exactly what you think would happen. It blows up in a Michael Bay fashion, killing everyone aboard the adjacent Star Destroyer to Agent Kallus. Heir and the rest of the crew come back and find out what just happened through Fulcrum, and some bad humor ensues. Meanwhile, Thrawn states to Agent Kallus in a little meeting after the fact that he now knows that the rebels are in one of the 94 systems the infiltrator droids were sent to, and this has greatly narrowed the search for the rebel base. Since any Imperial commander could have figured this out, this isn't exactly a display of Thrawn's brilliance. So yeah, You yet to show Thrawn do something intelligent or cool or whatever. I also have to wonder why the Empire can't spare 94 ships to dispatch to all 94 systems. From what I understand in Disney canon, the Empire had 26,000 Star Destroyers at its peak, and then this was made redundant come The Rise of Skywalker, where the Empire has 1 million. Yeah, The Rise of Skywalker had poor attention to detail, didn't it? Still though, I don't know what the Empire could use its other Star Destroyers for, so it would be wise to send at least one per system. It's also worth pointing out that in an overly militarized fascist state, it's important that the Empire actually finds an enemy to fight. Otherwise, the overspending on the military will stagnate. So yeah, it's best you take out the rebels to keep your military relevant. But as it's shown, we've still got a couple more episodes before the 2-part finale. So I guess the Empire might just not care that much. I am sort of curious on what else the Empire has at this point in the timeline could concern itself with. It's conquered most of the galaxy, I presume. So what could keep up the rest of the military? This is a genuine question that is never answered. It seems like a minimal Imperial force concerns itself with the rebellion, and I guess this explains why Grand Admiral Thrawn seems to achieve jack shit, but that's probably just bad writing. Again, Thrawn has way more resources than he did in his trilogy. I have heard that the Disney books explain that Thrawn is always being held back because he's an alien, but you wouldn't know that from watching Rebels, or anything else, since again, they made the Galactic Empire, a fascist state, look like pronoun central with all the diversity it has. The only other Disney canon Grand Admiral I've heard about is Rey Sloane, who is a black woman. Disney don't even think about this shit before they assign diverse characters to certain factions. Anyways, not to worry, we've got 8 episodes left in this season, so let's just get on with it. The next episode's called Trials of the Darksaber. Since we all know Sabine collected the Darksaber a couple of episodes ago, I can just tell what this shit's about. Sabine is doing some random shit as Fen Rao, remember him, walks into the Ghost. He then goes into Kanan's room, in which we learn he was called in by Kanan to talk about something important. What do you think it's gonna be? Kanan shows him the Darksaber, and that's where we get a history lesson that's done in 2D animation, which is super out of place, and I suppose it's just meant to be fancy backstory. The backstory isn't anything new, it's shit we've learned a long time in the Clone Wars, the predecessor to the show. Fen Rao, and I can't believe I'm saying this, suggests that if Sabine can wield it properly, she can unite the Mandalorian clans, and that could be an asset against the Empire. Yeah, more of this underage waifu shit. Filoni thinks that Sabine, who isn't even 18 yet, can lead the entirety of Mandalore? Well, I guess she can because she's a good old-fashioned Mary Sue. Yeah, I guess Cosmo Tar was right to call Sabine a Mary Sue, even if he contradicted himself later by stating that everyone in Star Wars is a Mary Sue, and then proceeded to show how little attention he pays to the movies. Point is, Sabine doesn't seem to break under pressure ever. She's revealed to be even more of a Mary Sue as the show goes on, but what we've seen so far is enough. She's this hip artist, an untouchable Mandalorian warrior, and does it without breaking a sweat. And she's like, what, 16? 17? Despite it being the early stages, this seems as woke as it can get. At first I didn't even think Star Wars Rebels was that woke, but Sabine proves me wrong. I guess I've gotten so used to Sabine being the unchallenged badass that I just adapted to the show's crap factor. Anyways, I started wondering why the hell someone like Fen Rao can't wield the Darksaber. He's the fucking ex-leader of a clan after all, so he actually has the skills to be a leader. Sabine doesn't. In fact, she's called into the meeting room where all the characters, especially Fen Rao, suggest she can wield the Darksaber and unite the clans and yada yada. Sabine doesn't accept the proposition because she's an underage girl and that would be a lot of pressure, but rather because, quote, the Darksaber has been nothing but trouble, and Darth Maul used it to divide the clans. Ugh, I hate this show. Sabine is such a lame Mary Sue. Sabine's refusal has nothing to do with weakness or vulnerability, but rather she just doesn't feel like it. I mean, she does reference that she has a rough history with her family, but that's about it. So unsurprisingly, she decides to accept the Darksaber. And I also hate how annoying Ezra is in this scene. He comes across like he's taunting Sabine with the Jedi values and whatnot. He's not very helpful. So whatever. She accepts the sword, and now she's got to train with it or whatever. Again, I have no idea why Fan Rao doesn't just do it. So Kanan takes Sabine and Ezra far outside Chopper Base, because according to him, Sabine needs to be extra focused. So anyway, Sabine and Kanan practice with their training sabers while Ezra watches. In the first part, Sabine fails to overpower Kanan, who dodges or deflects all of her attacks and hands her ass to her. Needless to say, this might just be the most amount of enjoyment I get out of this whole episode, because I hate Sabine. Then Kanan delegates Ezra to train Sabine in common lightsaber stances and shit. Why he couldn't just do it himself, I have no idea. By the time we get to the ad break checkpoint, it's apparently been a few days when Hera contacts Kanan. I certainly couldn't tell if I wasn't told, and apparently Sabine is still going through the basic forms. Now I really have to wonder why the hell Fan Rao couldn't do all this shit. If Sabine's that slow with training, there's also no sense of urgency with the war and whatnot. Like, the writers do still remember that Thrawn has narrowed down the location of the rebel base the episode before this, right? I guess that was just a crappy cliffhanger, and Thrawn's doing something, while Sabine and friends are dicking around with training sabers. So safe to say that I just don't care about what's going on. We also get to mention that Sabine's not Force sensitive or something, and Kanan has an unclear response that the Force resides in all living things, but Sabine's so blocked off. It made so many people confused when they showed that Sabine could use the Force. It just made me wonder why Kanan wasted his time with Ezra if there was already another Force sensitive in the Ghost crew. To me, it just seems like they're just muddling the rules. Anyways, I also got to criticize the animation. It's so floaty, and it's impossible to invest in the choreography. A few hours before I wrote this part of the script, I had a look at Attack of the Clones, and observing those fight scenes closely, it's not even competition. You can tell when the characters are anticipating each other's moves, and small intricate details that are completely absent here. I don't feel much aggression in Sabine's moves, nor the smugness of how easy Ezra is finding this. And since I'm already rooting against Sabine, I cheered when she lost again. Anyways, Fan Rao shows up with supplies and whatnot, and he apparently gives Sabine some Mandalorian braces which comes with equipment for combating a Jedi. And now with the video game upgrades, she overpowers Ezra easily right afterwards. I kept thinking about how they just make things too easy for the good guys in the show, and this I should add to it. Sabine gets some new equipment free of charge from Fan Rao, and now she can best Ezra. Then, like a total douchebag, she tries her new equipment out on Kanan, who gets wrapped around a tether. What a bitch. Kanan soon counteracts the tether, and he's furious. Then Sabine turns up the unlikability by remarking that Kanan must be such a lousy teacher for Ezra.
Wow, what an asshole.
Then out of frustration, she wanders off and sits on what is clearly Bendu. Uh-oh. Ezra tries to have a chat with her. Kanan meanwhile has a discussion with Hera, in which Hera strongly suggests letting her use the actual Darksaber instead of some crappy twiddling sticks.
Don't say it like that.
Anyways, this is where the turnaround happens. Upon Sabine coming back, Kanan hands her the Darksaber. And I really didn't like it when she remarks about its weight, because, you know, lightsabers are supposed to be weightless. Yes, I know it doesn't seem like that, but that's just how it works. Apparently the crystal is tied to her thoughts and actions and some bullshit, and then they have a training duel. Things only seem to get easier for Sabine, as she remarks after the first try that the blade's becoming lighter, and I kind of like the music that plays as this scene progresses. And I guess Kanan's new tactic is to taunt Sabine, telling her that she failed in the most insulting way, that she was adopted and her parents don't love her. Anyways, this is what causes Sabine to go on some monologue about how she created weapons that were used by the Empire against Mandalore and her family didn't stand with her, blah blah. Damn, Sabine is a fucking scientist too? That's even more Mary Sueish than before. And so Sabine breaks down in tears, and I'm just fucking smiling. My dick didn't even move once. That's how phoned in this felt. So at the end of the day, Sabine's learned all she can with the Darksaber, and is ready to go see her family. By now I would have quit this show, but it's my dedication to see it through. So let's get on with the next fucking episode. So at the very least, they don't waste time bringing us over to Sabine's world Crown Nest, The weirdest name for a Star Wars planet, but whatever. Sabine contacts the welcoming party as she and friends enter the atmosphere, and what happens? Jetpacked Mandalorians show up to shoot them down, presumably to kill them. This results in a crash, and so they come up with a plan, where Ezra, Sabine, and Kanan will confront the Mandos, while Fenn Rau stays hidden in the Phantom. Upon the Mandalorians catching up to them, they start shooting at the good guys, resulting in the good guys defending themselves. Now, where things really start to get confusing is when Ezra deflects a bolt back at an Imperial Super Commando, and upon hearing Ezra mention Sabine's name, he gets his Mando buddies to cease fire, and this is where the Super Commando unmasks himself, and Sabine recognizes him. It's her brother Tristan. Wait, so I'm confused. At the start of the episode, Sabine can be heard mentioning her name to the welcoming party, but they shot down the ship anyways. But now that they're grounded, they aren't up to finishing her off. Was this just to create some tension for the start of the episode without any regard for the story? Yes, that's exactly what this is, goddammit. Yeah, so we're like 3 or 4 minutes in and the problems with the episode start rolling in. Tristan in particular has the most subpar reaction to seeing Sabine again. He questions Sabine's allegiances, but it's not like he holds any noticeable resentment. Like, Sabine was referenced as betraying the clan and turning her back on them, so Tristan doesn't really reinforce this idea. Sabine's warning that her family hates her guts doesn't really live up to when we finally get to it. I was given the impression that her family would detest her, but in reality, it's mild annoyance. So Tristan and friends decide to escort his sister's group, and doesn't even bother to inspect the Phantom, which is pretty lazy writing, because it results in Fenn Rau able to sneak into the base, making things too easy for the good guy again. I don't expect anything less, but I'm still disappointed. Anyways, the main group is escorted to the Clan Wren fortress or something, and out steps out Sabine's mother, Ursa Wren. Now, Ursa has more of a reaction I expected to see with her daughter. She orders that she be locked up and await trial, but then Sabine pulls out the damn Darksaber and startles her mother. But I guess that was little more than the cliffhanger for the commercial break, because when Ursa demands the Jedi surrender their weapons, they do so. So anyways, they're all taken indoors where they have a little chat. Ursa is pissed at Sabine for dragging down Clan Wren's reputation, and explains how Tristan joined Gar Saxon to retain some status of reputation. She also dismisses Sabine about the Protectors, remarking that Fenn Rau will be punished when he's found, and then Sabine and her mum take a walk outside. And at this point, I really don't care as they go on about the ultimatum the Empire gave the Mandalorians and how Sabine's dad is actually alive, and we're only learning about this now. After some talk that I really don't give a shit about, Tristan walks in, telling her about how Gar Saxon's calling, and they switch places. This is where we also see that Fenn Rau's spying on the place. In one of the most reckless please kill me moments in the entire show, Ursa flat out reveals to Gar Saxon everything about his daughter's return, including the 2 Jedi she brought with him. Nice one, Mum. And you'd think that Ursa would try to solve this problem on her own, instead of calling the ruthless Gar Saxon, who might do anything with this information. I mean, with Fenn Rau and the Protectors, they tried everything to hide the fact that Fenn Rau was captured by the rebels, because they knew that if the Empire found out, they'd all be executed. Now, it turns out they were going to be executed anyways, but at the time, it seemed like a good call to make. Wouldn't harboring 3 rebels be a more punishable offense in Gar Saxon's eyes? I have no idea why Ursa did this, other than to move the story forward. Ursa wants to have full autonomy over her daughter though. So after leaving the meeting room, Fenn Rau sneaks in after them, knocks out a guard who enters too, and grabs Kanan and Ezra's lightsabers. So anyways, Ursa then proceeds to talk to Ezra and Kanan, and after Ezra reveals that he met Gar Saxon on Conquered Dawn, Ursa's first instinct is to order them executed. Meanwhile, Sabine is in the middle of a sparring match with her brother Tristan, and he spills the beans on what their mother's gonna do to her friends because he's got a loose tongue, I guess. And Sabine comes in right on time just as the pair are about to be executed. Then Gar Saxon and friends come in. I wondered to myself how Gar Saxon got here so quickly. The sense of time was extremely short. In fact, this felt like this was happening back to back. Anyways, Ursa conforms to all of Gar Saxon's demands, including handing over the Darksaber. And then, because he hates second chances, he orders Clan Ren to be made an example of. When Tristan steps in and tries to use the crappy "we're all Mandalorians" argument on Gar Saxon, he gives Tristan an ultimatum. He can join him or die with his family. And after some time thinking, Tristan decides that he's going with family over him. Then the fight begins. I also just want to make clear that Ursa receives no consequences for her poor judgment. Eventually, Sabine and Saxon lock lightsaber blades with each other, and this just leads to a shitty final confrontation. Yeah, I said final confrontation. We've known this villain for like 2 episodes, and now his story is at an end. So everyone watches as Saxon and Sabine go at it, and you want to know who wins this fight? The Mandalorian leader / governor, or a teenage girl? You guessed it, the teenage girl wins. So Saxon refuses to yield after being defeated, and they have this fake out where they try to convince you Sabine was shot, but then the camera pans over.
And it's gone.
Yeah, I wasn't lying when I said this villain dies 2 episodes after he was introduced. Why the hell did they bother making a unique character model if they're just gonna throw it all away that easily? It's not even like this is the last we see of Mandalorians and Mandalore or whatever in the show, and Gar Saxon was the governor of Mandalore. Knowing the Empire, there's probably going to be a power struggle when people realize he's dead. You know how I criticized Crimson Empire for killing Carnor Jax too early because he was absolutely the biggest threat the storyline could offer? Yeah, well this is that same problem on steroids. Gar Saxon seems like an underdeveloped guest villain used as a petty obstacle and nothing else. Or maybe they just wanted to say that the late Ray Stevenson was in the show. I mean, this show has a lot of guest appearances from the most random actors. Like, did you know that Senator Travis, for example, was voiced by Brent Spinner, who you may recognize as the android Data from Star Trek The Next Generation? Yeah, that's right, he voiced Travis, and I never fucking knew until doing my research. In fact, let's keep going. Did you know that Zebo is voiced by Peter McNichol, who played Janos in Ghostbusters 2? I sure didn't for the longest time. Or hell, did you know that Martin Matten is voiced by Zach Gordon, who played Greg Heffley in the Diary of a Wimpy Kid movies? Where the hell did they get all these actors that I recognize for some random role somewhere? It's almost like Filoni watched Ghostbusters 2, for example, and was like, oh yeah, the guy who plays Janos, he's definitely got to voice this random character. Let's give him a call, wherever the hell he is now. Like, someone tell me I'm not the only one. The casting feels exactly like Filoni watched a bunch of popular, well-known movies and decided the actors and actresses for Rebels would be based on the movies he watched. I mean, that's not unusual seeing someone in a movie and wanting them to be in your movie, or in this case show, but I mean like, it feels like that's how this whole show's cast was picked. It can't be a coincidence that you recognize all the actors from somewhere. And I'm not the guy who watches that many movies, but I've seen Ghostbusters, I've seen Diary of a Wimpy Kid, I've seen Star Trek, I've seen the live-action Scooby-Doo. This is such a random yet interesting thing to note about the show. Anyways, back to the show. Gar Saxon is wasted both literally and metaphorically. And it turns out Sabine's mum can't help out the rebellion because Mandalore's gotta be liberated first or something. There's some talking, and that's the episode. Kill me. So in episode 17, we start with a weird first-person perspective, with Agent Kallus looking at himself through the mirror. Heading over to the bridge, there's a captured rebel transport, and upon being unmasked, the rebel turns out to be Ezra Bridger. Joining us in this episode is the dude from season 2 who fell for Princess Leia's embarrassing ruse. Yeah, that guy. His name is List if you didn't know. Yeah, of course, nobody recognizes Ezra Bridger except for Agent Kallus. Convenient. Anyways, when Agent Kallus talks to Ezra, he's annoyed and worried at what will happen if anyone recognizes him. And Ezra dismisses him. Nice to know that Ezra is fine with these high-risk missions. After faking a punch from Kallus, Ezra pretends to yield as List comes in. He reveals that both he and Kallus are invited on board Thrawn's flagship, the Chimera. Now, since the bad guys are incompetent, they don't actually process the 2 droids AP5 and Chopper that accompanied Ezra. They just believe their story about being innocent droids on the transport, and they don't even think of the possibility that they might be with the rebel. Oh my god, is the lazy writing just crashing down or what? Yeah, so 3 potential rebels are allowed on board the Chimera, and since they don't suspect the 2 droids, they're given free reign over the ship. We see meanwhile that Rex and Kanan have got the getaway transport. So anyways, while the Chimera goes about its business, Kallus and List enter Thrawn's quarters using a cylinder. After having it scanned, they're both led inside, in which they see Thrawn sparring with droids in the newest season of Chiss Ascendancy Ninja Warrior. It's kind of embarrassing how they couldn't get Lars Mikkelsen to do some much needed exercise for the live action version of Thrawn. Hence the remarks that he's an out of shape Grand Admiral eating macas since his exile. But we'll get to that later. Way later. So Thrawn is sparring with sentry droids, and apparently the shutdown command is Rook. I'm guessing Filoni just wanted you to piss your pants and be like,
he said it!
They have a little meeting with Thrawn and a guest character, Wolf Yularen. The character Filoni looked at in A New Hope, looked at the white uniform, and thought he was a Grand Admiral. We also get a cameo from Admiral Constantine. So Thrawn with all the boys in the room conducts a meeting, discussing their search for the mysterious rebel spy known as Fulcrum. Thrawn also reveals that he's narrowed down the rebel base to a select few worlds. You can count 11 on screen. And again, I have to ask, why not just send a Star Destroyer to each world at this point and bomb the planet from orbit or something? Whatever. So apparently these 11 worlds we can see are narrowing down the rebel base. So after the meeting and talking to Wolf Yularen, who knows Kallus is, quote, one of his top students, Kallus decides to play a trick on List and frame him for being the spy. He sneakily switches cylinders with him and misdirects him into thinking Governor Pryce is the spy. The naive List goes along with his recommendation. Okay, is this just making things way too easy again? Doesn't List know to be suspicious of everyone, minus the Grand Admiral? Why would you be so trusting of Kallus all of a sudden, after a meeting that urged caution? Again, they're just making the Imperials easy to manipulate morons, because the plot's gotta play out. Also, while watching this episode, I had to wonder why Thrawn didn't set up cameras in pivotal spots. Like, say, his quarters, for example. Like, a key place for a spy to go is definitely his quarters. Or maybe the sentry droids could have a recording system too. Point is, finding the spy shouldn't require the antics the episode puts us through. Finding the spy isn't rocket science, but the show treats it like it is. Again, Kallus goes to free Ezra Bridger before Thrawn and friends can meet him. Kallus updates Ezra on what he knows via Thrawn's little meeting, and they decide they've got to get to Thrawn's desk and erase the planet and replace it with a faulty world. They even manage to get Ezra an Imperial uniform off screen, because that's how little this show gives a shit about challenging the good guys. So anyways, they mind trick the guard and get to Thrawn's office, and they first contact codes to Kanan and Rex, and then they do the thing with the projection of the potential rebel worlds. I'm just going to assume that Thrawn stored a backup file or something, and that's how he finds out where the rebel base is later down the line. Conveniently, Thrawn shows up back to his quarters, and the trio have to hide. Conveniently, Ezra has a large block to hide behind as Thrawn comes in with his gunmen. Kallus reprograms the sentry droids who attack Thrawn and friends. So on the way to escape, Governor Pryce questions Kanan and Rex in disguise, telling them to remove their helmets immediately. When they don't comply, a stormtrooper uses a stun shot on Kanan instead of a lethal round for some reason. Okay, whatever. She has a fist fight with Rex, and the still naive List stuns Governor Pryce since he still thinks she's the spy. Of course, they all get away except Kallus, because Kallus tells him that he has to stay behind to sell the deception that List is the rebel spy. Yeah, so Kallus sells out List, who gets taken away. He yells out that Kallus told him Governor Pryce was the spy, and that's the last we see of him ever. Anyways, Kallus is congratulated on his efforts, yada yada, but as you can soon guess, as soon as Kallus and Pryce leave, Thrawn and Yularen have their doubts that List was the spy. Of course, they try to play this off as Thrawn's brilliance and thinking ahead and whatnot, but I actually think it's pretty lazy. It seems the detention cells are the only place with security cameras set up on the Chimera, which I mean, doesn't make any sense. Thrawn, as mentioned earlier, could have set up cameras in his quarters or literally anywhere else on the Chimera. He didn't. It was his negligence that let those 2 rebel droids bounce around. You'd think Thrawn would be stricter than that before letting anyone on the Chimera. Seriously, I don't understand why Ezra never tried to attempt to kill Thrawn. You could have attacked him while he was fending off sentry droids. Yeah, that would have been a perfect opportunity to get rid of him if he's that much of a threat. Why the hell did you even hide from Thrawn if all he brought with him for protection were 2 measly stormtroopers? Maybe I'm nitpicking here, but when it comes to Thrawn, you gotta bring your A game when you ride him. There's no room for error. And Filoni included a lot of errors. The way this is set up is just to frame the Grand Admiral like he's some strategic badass. But it doesn't work when you put in a shred of critical thought. Furthermore, this episode was just stupid. Characters like Ezra Bridger really do not flow well with Grand Admiral Thrawn. Putting Thrawn in the show was a mistake, but who was gonna tell Filoni he couldn't at this point? He's known for cherry-picking and reaping the rewards. Not having Timothy Zahn be in the writer's room was a lethal, arrogant mistake. I mean, I can only imagine how much better the show might have been if they got someone like him and didn't restrict him. He wrote a decent Disney canon novel, he can write Rebels at that rate, and maybe Thrawn would have lived up to the hype. Also, with a 22-episode season like Rebels, they couldn't afford to have Thrawn waste time. And what does he do? He wastes time. Expanded Universe Thrawn would have found the Rebel base 10 episodes ago at latest. Let's move on to episode 18 now. So this episode has Ezra and friends watch the boring propaganda that is the HoloNet. They then hear a story about how Mon Mothma was talking shit about the Emperor and is now a fugitive. With that being said, the rebels are hiding from some shitty probe droid, and Ezra is a bad shot when they try to destroy it, and then a rebel ship shows up. As it turns out, there is some, quote, valuable cargo they're supposed to escort. Who do you think it is? Yeah, you guessed it, it's Mon Mothma. The Empire pursues them, and they just jump to hyperspace. They've got a plan to go through some nebula and make it all the way to Dantooine. Apparently the Empire values Mon Mothma a lot, which is why we've got the Grand Admiral on all this. He sends out Governor Price and Admiral Constantine to intercept them, and the thing is, he can never do the job himself directly, because I'm guessing that you're going to need to either have Thrawn defeat the rebels in a major way, or have him lose. So I guess Filoni thought it was better if they could technically say Thrawn didn't screw up, the people he sent did. This is exactly what they did with Tarkin. They just have him be artificially competent and ruthless, and apparently the rebels destroying his Star Destroyer doesn't count as a fuck-up he has to account for. This is just a sneaky way of having the bad guys you don't want to make look bad have a clean record, and it's lazy. And guess what? The failure at the end still falls on Thrawn at the end of the day. Why? Because he was the one who sent Governor Price and Admiral Constantine in the first place. So Rebel pilot Vander, who I think is supposed to be a minor character in the original trilogy, flies alongside Ezra and the Ghost across the nebula, while they're being chased by the prototype TIE Defender, which is sent alongside 2 shitty TIE Interceptors, which don't get destroyed early on, because of course they do. They're TIE Interceptors. They don't have shields. The pilot in the Defender, however, survives, and I just loved how there's only that one prototype. One measly ship chasing them goes to show how little the writers tried to challenge themselves. I don't care how advanced the TIE Defender is, it's one ship and is defeatable by 2 rebel pilots with obvious plot armor. Also, to every pilot, Rebel or Imperial who died in this episode, I forgot to apply a little something to you.
And it's gone.
Anyways, 2 Star Destroyers show up to ruin the day, but the Rebels find out that the proton torpedoes can rupture the nebula, and they can use that to disable the destroyers, both of them, so the Ghost can get away. And then Mon Mothma makes her speech above Dantooine, and that's the episode.
Lame!
Is this really what we were building towards? A speech to every rebel cell? I was hoping for something more interesting and impressive. Whatever, that's the episode. And before we get to the shit that people actually talk about, we've got one last filler episode. This one's called Double Agent Droid, and it concerns the insufferable pair of AP5 and Chopper, being paired up with Wedge Antilles, who discovers he's stuck with the assignment no one wanted. What an interesting choice using a legacy character for this episode. They could have easily had Ezra or Zeb and I don't think anything would have changed in this episode. They still would have been fed up with the droid duo's antics. The show just goes out of your way to annoy you on purpose, with AP5 and Chopper moving back and forth. I'd just like to mention while we're here that Ezra and Zeb sarcastically laugh before Wedge goes off with the droids. Like they know that he's got the shitty assignment.
Wow, what an asshole.
Well, anyways, they go to a random station, pass off clearance codes, get approved to land, and this is where we get more of AP5 and Chopper's antics. They constantly argue, and it's not even like they're in a stressful situation like Anakin and Obi-Wan in Attack of the Clones. Like, seriously, if you can't be okay with this if you give Obi-Wan and Anakin shit for arguing in the prequel trilogy, you can still tell they're friends in that instance, because that's not all their banter is. I swear that beyond introducing AP5, they've just argued and argued and argued, and I just hate it. Now, I'm pretty much always on AP5's side during these arguments, because we all know that Chopper's a completely erratic droid in need of a memory wipe, but Hera just refuses to do that. But that's not the point. Nothing they argue about is insightful, or builds on the two characters, because let's face it, it's just there to give the characters something to say. In fact, you can tell that the constant fighting can compromise the mission. This is where AP5 decides to do the rest of the mission all by himself. Anyways, the villains of this episode are like a team of Imperial slicers who discover that Chopper is entering the facility. They use security cameras and data to figure out Chopper's here, and then they completely hijack his systems. At first they try to extract the location of the rebel base, because they'll all get a big payday if they please Thrawn like this. You know, I don't think this matters anyways. We all know that Thrawn knows who the rebel spy is anyways, so you're only slightly speeding this up. Yeah. This is exactly what a filler episode is. I mean, the conflict is so weak, and we know they're only delaying the inevitable at this point. This episode probably should have been placed earlier in the season, because at least they could artificially sell the threat of finding the rebel base and whatnot. Anyways, after learning that Chopper doesn't have the rebel base's coordinates stored in its memory banks, they decide to just take the droid completely over. Yeah, now they've got a little spy droid. Well, at least I can say someone was able to defeat Chopper. So yeah, they decide to pose as Chopper and use it to follow the rebels to their base. Needless to say that of course AP5 catches on to Chopper's odd behavior. Personally, I don't think they did the best job of posing as a spy. The best idea is to lay low and stay quiet. Giving out minimal responses and avoiding unwanted attention is a good idea for an infiltrator. Well, right off the bat, Chopper tips AP5 to the fact that he's been compromised. The slicers actually communicate to AP5 with an Imperial code that tells him that he's on standby mode. Needless to say, this was the slicer's worst mistake, because AP5 just catches onto Chopper, in which the slicer's attempts to appease AP5 doesn't work, and just convinces AP5 even more that he's being compromised. Yeah, again, staying quiet and not drawing attention would have been the best idea, wouldn't it? Anyways, there's even a part where Wedge has to use the bathroom and AP5 walks in on him. Yeah, this is the first walking in while using the toilet scene in Star Wars ever, as far as I know. Even if it's not, it's so juvenile that Star Wars Rebels would do this. So anyways, back on the Ghost, the slicers are terrible at keeping a low profile as Chopper, and they decide to take matters into their own hands by luring the crew into the engine room and then locking them out. Then the slicers go over to the cockpit and slice through with a data spike to learn the location of the rebel base. After failing to shut out the crew out the airlock, the crew come up with a plan to use AP5, an inventory droid, to walk onto the surface of the Ghost and release them. I didn't realize a droid like AP5 would be able to attach itself to something like the vacuum of space, but whatever. Anyways, with all that being said, AP5 is launched off the Ghost, and Chopper returns to the cockpit, only to be ambushed by the crew. That's where Hera has the idea to overload the power on the slicers and destroy their ship. This works for some reason, and the ship goes full Michael Bay. Also, since this is a Disney show, it turns out the uncompromised Chopper is completely fine. If you didn't have the guts to destroy him, you could have at least given him a memory wipe, you know? Give this episode at least some sort of consequence. Then to prove the writers were on drugs, we get a short scene of AP5 adrift in space, and he actually starts singing a tune, which is just out of place. And then the Ghost retrieves him, and then there's another argument between Chopper and AP5, and that's the episode. Yeah, this is perhaps the most pointless episode in the whole series that I can think of. Thrawn will find the rebel base anyways. And as well as that, there's no consequences. Chopper retaining his memory was such a Disney moment in how it was set up. The episode in general was just not interesting. And finally, we can talk about 3 important episodes. I say important very loosely because this whole show is a waste of time, but if you know the show, you know we're talking about twin sons. This is what the episode is called, by the way, in case you're confused, but basically, this episode starts with Darth Maul. Aside from a great performance by Sam Witwer, the self-monologue doesn't give us much. Maul has basically got insane, again, and is absolutely fed up with looking for Obi-Wan. As far as we've seen, he hasn't tried anything to draw Obi-Wan out. I remember in the Clone Wars, he massacred a village to draw him out. Why he doesn't try this again is anyone's guess. You're never gonna find him organically just by wandering a big fuck-off desert. Okay, so the episode after the intro proceeds to show Ezra sleeping in his bunk with Zeb. Zeb is snoring because of course he is. All the dumb brutes do that. But point is, Ezra hears a holocron of Obi-Wan's message. He slowly goes to Kanan's room and hears Maul yell at the top of his lungs. Kanan comes in and they do another meeting where they discuss Obi-Wan Kenobi. Rex remarks that Senator Organa confirmed his death. So we all know that Bail Organa lied to everyone to keep Obi-Wan safe. But the way they talk here, they never mention that incident that would have happened a few years earlier in the timeline where Kenobi was spotted out of hiding. Yeah, they do a piss poor job keeping track of their own continuity, don't they? Kenobi leaving Tatooine for an extended period of time was something that Disney came up with 100% out of their arse. That series was terrible, but it goes to show how they have no idea what they were doing. Speaking of, where the hell was Darth Maul during the Kenobi show? He would have jumped at the opportunity to find Kenobi, and I bet he would have been keeping tabs and whatnot. This is all the fault of the writers, but now that I watch Rebels, I feel weird that the characters don't really reference anything that happened in that shitty Disney Plus show. Ezra really wants to go to Tatooine, and Heir decides to try and discourage him, reasoning that if Kenobi were alive, he wouldn't just stay on a backwater planet. He would be helping the rebellion. With that being said though, what does Ezra do? He disobeys Hera. Gee, I guess the writers just couldn't go without an active teenage rebellion in its plot. I guess that's why the show is called Rebels of all things. I always thought to myself how much I dislike the name Rebels. I don't know, that's a broad term. I prefer something like Rise of the Rebellion or something that covers time periods or events. Also because the predecessor is called The Clone Wars, so they didn't have an excuse. Anyways, as soon as Ezra leaves, we then cut to presumably a few hours later at the very least. As shown earlier, Chopper himself decided to hitch a ride, and Ezra's only noticing the damn stowaway now. This is ridiculous. Since it's too late to turn back, Ezra and Chopper try to track Kenobi with the pieces of the holocron that Ezra has. This only ends up leading them into a trap pretty much. Yeah, I have to wonder why the hell Ezra wasn't prepared for something like this. Following the trail blindly could potentially lead him to Maul. Point is, the pair are ambushed by Tusken Raiders, who manage to blow up the ship. Maul sneakily kills all the Tusken Raiders. However, Ezra and Chopper do not witness this and decide to go forward now that their transport is busted. Not like they have much choice. By the time it's daytime, they've been wandering for hours. They decide to walk into the open desert because that's where Kenobi is apparently. Ezra wants to blindly walk into the desert, and the plan mostly backfires. Chopper is overwhelmed by the incoming sandstorm, and Ezra eventually collapses. Then a certain someone shows up to save them. Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yeah, that's right, he makes his appearance here. And it's here where he and Ezra have a little chat. Kenobi just says that Maul led him here to draw him out, relying on his desire to do good and lead him to his old adversary. We know he's not being completely truthful, as Kenobi does actually sort of have the key to destroying the Sith under his watch, but Ezra doesn't learn this. And so he rides off when Maul shows up, Kenobi stating that he must face him alone. He even says that he must mend to this, quote, old wound. Yeah, you know where they're going with this. Maul ignites his lightsaber, puts out the fire, and both go into a stance to fucking murder each other. The music at least is half decent, and then we get the shallow payoff.
And it's gone.
Yep. 3 strikes and Maul's out. When it comes to this episode, this is pretty much what everyone talked about when it was brand new. This is a rare time 2 characters go at it, and the fight ends quickly. And what do I think? Do I think this artsy final duel between Kenobi and Maul was a clever way to subvert expectations, yet bring meaningful commentary or whatever? No! Yeah, let's bring the most notable problem with this fight. It's completely plagiarized from the comic Old Wounds. If you don't know, there's a collection of short stories called Star Wars Visionaries, and the first story included is Old Wounds, a non-canon short story set 3 years after Revenge of the Sith, in which Darth Maul randomly shows up to the Lars homestead with, wait a minute, Maul's return was completely plagiarized here. His appearance in Old Wounds was later stolen for the Clone Wars. How fitting that his story ends with a fit of plagiarism. Copy-paste, bitch. So yeah, they stole this idea for the final duel from Old Wounds, and it isn't like Filoni didn't know this comic existed. Because yes, he did. The legs were later used for the Clone Wars. At least Old Wounds knew how to keep itself out of Star Wars canon. But here? So the episode has Dave Filoni and Henry Gilroy credited as the writers, but they forgot to add a bracket that says, plagiarized from a story created by Leland Shee. This is exactly the Tales of the Jedi Chinese bootleg edition, all over again. Just stealing someone else's creation and passing it off as your own. And let me tell you, how many Star Wars Rebels fans know about Old Wounds, or decided to read it themselves? Pretending that the work is not plagiarized for a minute, I don't see the value in having Maul die in 3 strikes. And if I didn't know any better, I would have thought they would have wasted enough time with a 20-minute episode and decided to just have it be quick and over in a flash. The episode was pretty forgettable aside from the ending anyways. So I'm guessing that they just wanted to entice you with the ending. You can tell they wanted to make a statement about where Maul's desire for revenge got him. Down the shitter. Maul in his last moments asks Kenobi if the one he's protecting is the chosen one, and Kenobi responds that he is. And then the confusion began. Some have tried to excuse this by stating that Obi-Wan merely thought that Luke was the chosen one at this point, but I mean, like, knowing Filoni, I'm not 100% sure that's what he meant. I didn't really see any meaningful interaction between Obi-Wan and Maul. It's difficult to describe, but I was just left feeling empty. People tried touting this up as a meaningful end to Darth Maul's story. But years later, when people talk about the most notable Star Wars moments, as far as I've seen, this is rarely brought up. When I look back at this, I just think about the gimmick of 3 strikes and Maul's out, and not the shit that came after. There's also a lack of attention to detail, where Maul doesn't eject Night System magic as he's about to die, like Savage Press did. I mean, Maul's mind was restored with Night System magic. Wouldn't it make sense for him to lose his sanity once again, going closer to death, and perhaps he delusionally curses out at Kenobi or something? I don't know. That's what you'd expect to happen, right? But I guess they just forgot you're supposed to wear off the Night System magic. They just wanted to have Maul ask Kenobi what he did, with no regard for how they brought him back in the first place. Man with the Spartai clone Maul idea have worked so much better. So point is, that's Maul's questionable end. And then another lack of attention to detail. Despite the fact that Luke's supposed to be 14 or 15 or whatever, they show Obi-Wan observing him from a distance. And they show a silhouette of someone who looks much, much younger, who's supposed to be Luke. Yeah, I think they forgot about that timeline-wise. Ezra and Luke were literally born 2 days apart canonically. Ezra is slightly older than Luke. With that being said, however, upon Ezra returning to base, everyone's not pissed at him, which I don't feel is earned because of Heir's attitude earlier. And that's the episode. Yeah, so the episode was a whole load of nothing. The whole episode felt like a waste of time until Kenobi and Maul came face to face, and then they ruin it. You know, I was never crazy about Darth Maul's character. I just spoke about how aside from a few cool moments, I was very much underwhelmed by Darth Maul in the Filoni-verse. His appearance in Season 7 definitely didn't do him any favors, because Ahsoka decided to let him go to save herself. Bringing Maul back was a mistake, at least the way they did it. Making him an insane Spartai clone would have been better, but resurrecting the original Maul? The dude was cut in fucking half. His story was over, he was a henchman who died, but not before changing the saga forever by taking out Qui-Gon Jinn. He served his purpose. Well, at least Darth Maul's dead now. In Disney canon. In the real canon, he died a long time ago, and is just a notable piece of the larger history of the Star Wars franchise. Alrighty, so now it's time for the finale to the season. It's a two-parter called 0 Hour, and it finally concerns Thrawn finding the damn rebel base and launching an attack. So let's see how it plays out. So Thrawn arrives at Lothal and decides to have a private meeting with Governor Pryce and Admiral Constantine. For some reason, despite it being a few episodes ago, they still haven't dealt with the traitor, that being Kallus. In fact, because he hasn't been dealt with, Kallus actually manages to get his hand on a remote control mouse droid, and he uses it to eavesdrop on the meeting. So Thrawn's talking about how the rebels cannot get the information that they're about to share with each other in the meeting. Thrawn contacts Tarkin, and informs him about the rebels' plan to strike at the Imperial Factory in Lothal. Thrawn's spies also know that General Dodonna and Commander Sato are about to meet up with Captain Syndulla. At this point, Tarkin still demands Thrawn take prisoners of Rebel Command. I don't know why they'd give a shit about prisoners at this point, but whatever. And as we see, Kallus heard the whole thing. So the room wasn't as secure as Thrawn thought. A massive oversight. Anyways, back to Chopper Base, where everyone's prepared to go attack the factory on Lothal. Kanan and Ezra have a talk about none of this would have been done without him, and in the meanwhile, Commander Sato shows up with General Dodonna, preparing for their strike. We see Agent Kallus go to his little Fulcrum snitching station, and tries to warn the rebels about what Thrawn knows, but Thrawn interrupts him, and informs him that the rebels won't be receiving his warning. So Kallus takes his chances and pulls some kung fu on the Admiral, although he is defeated and captured. Thrawn then reveals how he figured out where the rebel base is, and to get around the fact that the planet was removed, well, apparently it's back to Thrawn studying art, where apparently he noticed that the locals in that sector recognize a system there known as a Tollon. So yeah, he's got his planet. And what do you know? They don't kill Kallus. It's the whole, I could kill you, but I want you to see me destroy everything you love cliche, and Thrawn deserves better than that. In the next scene, despite what Thrawn said about the rebels not being able to receive his warning, they do in fact receive his warning, although it's cut off before the specifics are laid out. But they can piece together what Fulcrum was talking about. So yeah, Thrawn really done goofed here. He let the message get out. Not that the rebels have much time to prepare, but it's better than nothing. Everyone is alerted to man their battle stations as 5 Star Destroyers show up. They try to evacuate when they realize they'll have to cancel the mission to Lothal. They're unable to jump into hyperspace because of a brand new gravity well. Shortly after, Grand Admiral Thrawn shows up. We get the trope where the bad guy hijacks the good guy's communications to make an evil message. He just gloats to Hera, telling her that he wants her to know what utter defeat looks like, and blah 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 blah. Generic bad guy talk. I can't believe they've watered Thrawn down to this. So when he cuts communications, Kanan says that he's got to go talk to Bendu about all this shit. Oh yeah, Bendu. I half forgot he was in the show at this point. I haven't even kept track of which character they've used more so far, Thrawn or Bendu. Anyways, on the Imperial side of things, Thrawn tells Admiral Constantine to hold back and not to directly engage the rebels, and they'll be fine as long as he does exactly what he says, when he says it. Anyways, more rebel ships get destroyed, and finally we get Kanan talking to Bendu. With that, Bendu essentially tells Kanan to fuck off. He ain't interested in his war. He was here long before him, and will be here long after his ass. So the answer for help is no. More rebel ships meanwhile get destroyed, and Commander Sato decides to sacrifice himself so that a ship can escape and gather help from other rebel cells. Yeah, that's right. He pulls a kamikaze, with most of his crew abandoning ship, and Admiral Constantine decides to ignore Thrawn's orders and moves to intercept. Sato and his 2 friends crash themselves into Constantine's ship with the gravity well,
and it's gone.
Thanks for not having the guts to kill anyone who fucking matters. Commander Sato is just a character the writers made up that wasn't in the films so he could be sacrificed later. No development whatsoever, aside from his nephew Mart Matten, if you could call that development. Not just another filler episode. Anyways, both Sato and Constantine are dead, and this is just another fucking example of them shifting blame away from Thrawn. The showrunners seem to have the impression that as long as it's not Thrawn pulling big blunders like this, it doesn't fall on him, and they think they can just have other characters screw up and let the good guys win. The problem is that we don't see Thrawn adapt very well to when his peers fuck everything up. Thrawn just remarks that Constantine was reckless. And you know, why the hell did Thrawn trust Constantine in the first place? Thrawn, being the dude who can read anyone like a book, could have delegated Constantine to something else? I mean, Constantine is the same incompetent admiral who couldn't destroy a midget from space if the Empire's survival depended on it. No offense to those with dwarfism. To sum up the rest of part 1 up, Kanan pisses Bendu off, who decides to attack both sides, and Ezra, who's able to jump into hyperspace, is denied assistance by Mon Mothma, who can't afford to spare ships, so he looks to asking Sabine and the Mandalorians for help. And that's the cliffhanger. Yeah, we all know that the rebels will make it out on top at the end. It doesn't matter how many nameless rebels die, and besides, there's still a lot of rebel cells left. So assuming Thrawn would be able to destroy every rebel at Atollon, the war would be far from over. But let's just get on with it. So part 2 starts with all the ships docked at Chopper Base, and a prototype shield generator built by Sabine is set up around the base. Hera also urges Kanan to make it back to base. Thrawn orders an orbital bombardment of the entire base to breach through the shield and destroy the rebels once and for all. When I watched this, I was like, well, the rebels are certainly doomed now. I wonder what the excuse will be now that we've got an additional season to work with, and you want to know what it is? No, seriously, take a big fat guess. Thrawn calls off the orbital bombardment right as the rebels are going to be destroyed, and then decides to switch to a ground attack. Yes, I'm being serious. Thrawn had the easy victory here at this point, and he chose to postpone crushing the rebels. Let me guess, he wanted to capture some prisoners like Tarkin wanted. Yeah, well, I don't think that matters if the rebels get away. I heard Sun Tzu had a principle to always crush your enemy and give them no space to recover. Whatever the Star Wars equivalent is, Thrawn didn't read it. And for a guy so fixated on art, I'm shocked. Well, actually I'm not, because Thrawn is lazily written. Well, anyways, Thrawn decides to touch down on the surface with Imperial forces and oversee the defeat of the rebels. Yeah, so this is where Ezra goes to the Clan Ren Fortress and tells Sabine and everyone about how they need reinforcements. Initially they decline, citing their own problems, but then they ultimately decide to help the rebels after minimal convincing. We get a pointless land battle meanwhile, in which they send in walkers which get landmines detonated, and on top of that, Thrawn comes in with some death troopers. To make a long story short, the rebels are cornered and eventually come face to face with the Grand Admiral, but before an execution can happen, the pissed off Bendu shows up in the clouds and condemns both rebels and Imperials and starts causing chaos. I'd also like to mention how Kanan here has the perfect opportunity to quickly strike down Grand Admiral Thrawn, but instead runs away. I probably would have been pissed if they actually did that, because they can't seem to have an overarching villain, but the actual opportunity for Kanan to kill Thrawn was there, and he wasted it. So yeah, Ezra and Sabine disable the gravity well up in space, while Hera, Kanan, and friends seize their opportunity to get away. However, Thrawn orders his remaining troops to shoot at the center of the storm, which surprisingly works, and Bendu is grounded as the rebels escape. So yeah, Thrawn ultimately failed in his goal to destroy the rebels at Atollon, but I guarantee this doesn't affect his record at all. There's no way you can spin it. Thrawn failed. He screwed up and the rebels got away. He later closes in on Bendu, who apparently can see his defeat coming. Thrawn shoots Bendu, but he magically vanishes. It's also worth noting that Kallus was ordered out the airlock in space, but he surprisingly overpowered the stormtroopers in cuffs and joined the Ghost. And since I've wasted enough time already, everyone's relieved they got away and barely survived. With that being said, that's Star Wars Rebels Season 3. Normally this is just another shitty season of Star Wars Rebels, but unlike Seasons 1 and 2, they introduced one of the most well-known expanded universe characters and did him dirty. The Thrawn from the expanded universe would have laughed his Disney counterpart out of existence. Filoni completely missed the trick with Thrawn, and his arrogant decision to not include Timothy Zahn in the writing room, and instead he and Disney just got him to write a fuck-off book series that no matter what, won't change how poor his portrayal in Rebels was. So the imitation of Thrawn we got in Rebels was piss poor. But further than that, the other shit is just terrible. Darth Maul I didn't care about. The Sith holocron was pretty much dropped in one fucking episode. And the episode with the slices was just a huge waste of time. Starting with the Thrawn novel was probably a saving grace, but that's about it. But since Thrawn in the show is a fucking disgrace, I'm gonna have to give season 3 a 2.5 out of 10. A bit lower than last time. Also the fact that at this point, I was just fed the fuck up with this show. So yeah, I didn't have kind things to say about Thrawn here. As the selling point for the show onwards, he was butchered beyond belief, and Filoni couldn't bring on his A game in writing. So with all that, we only have one more season to go through before we can get into Ahsoka, aka Rebel Season 5 in live action. I'm also guessing after that we get the phony Filoni Heir to the Empire. Well, you've heard me talk about Rebel Season 3 in enough detail. Thank God Season 4 trimmed the episode count. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?
Under the mountain, a golden fountain, where you